IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast, a little Friday free-for-all mailbag action where you all get to lead the conversation. So make sure you're hitting that like button before we start, subscribe, notification bell, all that great stuff. But also, mailbag questions, make sure to throw them in the chat. Little MB before the question will always help designate it a lot quicker. Trying to get through it, obviously, as much questions as we possibly can and give you all as much opportunity to talk ball as possible. Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll, of course, joining you here on a Friday. Would love to just get right into this, Brian, but there's a little bit of business that we need to kind of take care of here. So, if you are not on the message board or you haven't been locked into Twitter so far today, you might not know that Notre Dame has just landed their first linebacker commitments in the 2024 class from Omaha, Nebraska, West Side defender Teddy Rezak, 6'4", 190 pounds. This one has really happened very quickly. We've gone over this a little bit already, getting offered, getting on campus last weekend, and then ultimately making the pledge for the Irish over offers from University of Nebraska, who came in late, Boston College that offered relatively early in this recruitment. Missouri just offered over the last few days as well. So Teddy Rezak is Irish, Brian. I know we want to hit on this, man, because this is a very fascinating recruitment, very fascinating backstory, because this one happened very, very quickly, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, you went from a kid that I didn't know who he was a month ago to a kid that they were going out to visit, right? Well, to visit his high school, do some background on him, offer him a scholarship, which we didn't see coming. And then a day later, he's on campus for a visit. And then less than a week later, he's committed. Right. And obviously, we've known that this was going to be the case for a few days, which is why I found the on-3 crystal ball prediction in Nebraska yesterday especially hilarious, was because this has been a done deal for a few days here, obviously. And so it's an interesting recruitment, Ryan, because I think my initial reaction to this was, you got to be kidding me. Like, are you panicking at linebacker already? That was kind of my initial gut reaction when I saw where the kid was from, the fact that I hadn't really heard of him before, and the fact that you look at his offer list, you're like, come on, man. And then you pop into film and you see something different, right? You see something. And then, of course, as soon as Notre Dame offers, what did we say? You're going to start to see other schools start to offer. Nebraska offers almost immediately. Missouri offers. And if he would have waited another month, there would have been a lot more offers coming for this young man. So this is a pickup for Notre Dame that is very intriguing, Ryan. There's some things that we really like about his film. There's some things that you look at, if you're being honest, to say, I'm not sure how I feel about that, right? And so we'll dive into a little bit of that today. We've talked about it before. We're not going to do a full commitment show breakdown because we'll do something this weekend on him because this is a mailbag show. But they get on the board at linebacker. They land a kid that they see as a Rover, that they've also talked to him about possibly growing into an inside linebacker. I see pure Rover in this kid for now. Yeah. When you look at his frame and size and just the fact that he doesn't have a huge frame. He doesn't have like really broad shoulders, it doesn't look like, but he's got a great wingspan. So there's a lot of things to like about this kid, Ryan. And it just comes down to, Notre Dame saying, basically, we're going to trust the film. We're going to trust our evaluation. And that's just where it is. And so you're landing a pure Rover. There aren't a lot of pure Rovers on the roster. There's definitely none that are close to 6'4" with 33-inch arms. That's for sure. And I think the staff just kind of is betting on their value. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, Ryan, from all the stuff the digging we've done. They're betting on their evaluation. They don't care what people think about it. They don't care what the stars are. They don't care what the offer lists are. They're betting on their own evaluation. And I like that, actually. But you better be right? But I like the fact that they're trusting their own evaluation. Now it's just about, okay, let's get it correct. You know what I mean? And let's make sure that you're right on this. And that's that's kind of how I see Teddy. But he's a talented player in certain ways. He can run. He's athletic. He's very instinctive. His film is incredibly impressive. There's two things that drag down his grade and why he's not a 4-star for me right now. He's very skinny for a guy that projects at linebacker, and he's not super powerful right now. He's a very willing tackler, Ryan, but he doesn't rock people when he hits them. And I think if those things get figured out and if he can answer those questions, this is going to end up being a steal for Notre Dame. If he can't, then he'll be a good special teams guy and a good depth player and a guy that you say, oh, I get where they're coming from, but it just didn't work out. There's potential there, Ryan. But that's the part that to me right now is a bit of an unknown with Teddy.
Well, and I think that, I mean, you talked about the Rover position on the roster for Notre Dame being a little bare. It was also kind of bare on the recruiting side for 2024. I mean, the Rovers that Notre Dame really liked, talking about like the Tylen Singletons of the world, right? The Cameron Pruitts, you end up not being able, obviously, to make those fits work ultimately in the end. So, I mean, when you looked at it, I think that this was a clear need that we need to find some more more depth or more players in that role specifically to Notre Dame, because Notre Dame still has a lot of talented players on the board that project favorably to a Will linebacker position. They project favorably to a Mike linebacker position. But there's not really a clear guy that I say, like, that kid is definitely a Rover, right? And I think that for me, like, Teddy Rezak's a kid that and someone asked me this on this week's mailbag. It was like, does Teddy play safety if he can't gain weight? And I'm like, no, he's just going to play Rover if he can't gain weight, right? Like, he's going to be 200-pound Rover at 6'3.5", 6'4", and he's going to be able to play that position because you're going to be asked him to play in space more often than not, than just kind of a condensed look as a defense. So I think he fits into that Rover spot very nice. I have question marks to your point about how much weight he can gain, how much he can put on that frame, how much power he can add on that frame. So, yes, they're talking about, you know, maybe eventually you're a Will linebacker in the system if you develop properly. Even if he doesn't, I think he still fits a need, obviously, in your defense, playing that Rover position, a unique body type for what you have at the position as well. I mean, you talk about right now, Jack Kaiser is 6'1", right? I know Jalen Sneed has long arms, but he's also right around 6'1". You don't have these types of Rovers on this roster right now that you look at and say 6'3.5", 6'4", kind of rangy types like that, as much as far as like having that long, tall frame. You really don't have that. So I think Teddy Rezak brings a different layer to the roster. And if nothing else, I think you just made your Rover position in the immediacy more diverse. And I'm a big fan of diversity of skill sets in any room. Talking about running backs, wide receivers, defensive linemen. I'm a big fan of diversity, guys that can do different things, because for me, that gives defensive coaches options. Like, there's different things that you can do with having Rover body types of Jalen Sneed and Teddy Rezak, right? Like, you can ask those guys to do very different things, but also some similar things in the same stretch. So I think he provides that versatility, obviously, at the position. And I think you just added a different body type and a different play style to what you have in that Rover room currently.
We're going to do a show, or at the very least, I'm going to do a show this weekend. Well, I'm not quite sure. I don't want to volunteer Ryan for a show that we haven't talked about yet, but I'm going to do a show this weekend at the very least where I'm going to talk about what's going on right now with linebacker recruiting and defensive recruiting as a whole. Because on the face of it, Ryan, I get this pickup. I like this pickup, and the only concern I have with defensive recruiting as a whole is there's a lot of guys like this in the defensive class so far. Yeah. A lot of lower floor but really high ceiling players, which is a good thing to have guys like that. We've talked about this. You need guys like that every year. I said this 2 years ago, right after Joe Alt committed. Give me a Joe Alt every year, because some of those kids are going to hit and be and really pan out. Joe Alt has done so. The next year it was Ashton Craig. So far, the Notre Dame staff is very high on Ashton Craig. He doesn't quite have the size that Joe got early on. You want to find those guys every year and say, hey, this may be a raw kid. It was Joe Otting in this last year's class. There's other positions, the Bryce Youngs, the Boubacar Traore's, the guys like that, where you're not going to get 5 stars across the board like Bama and Georgia do. You've got to find guys that can become 5 stars, right, or have the tools to become impact players. And that's what Bryce Young is. That's what Cole Mullins is. That's what Teddy Rezak is. That's what, I think Kennedy Urlacher is to a degree, not 5 stars, but, really higher ceilings than what they are right now. And obviously Leonard Moore is that kind of guy as well, but I would say his floor's a lot higher than other guys. Owen Wafel has a much higher floor. But there's a lot of these disparity type of players in this class. And so when you fill out the rest of this group, Ryan, and I'm talking the entire defensive class, it's time to start landing some of those guys that have higher floors as well. That's going to be a key filling this out. And this is especially true of linebacker. And so now that you have now that you have Teddy Rezak in the class, you look at what your board look like. They've been out visiting a lot of recruits. They've got to zero their board in now, in my opinion, and say, okay, it's going to be Kingston Viliama Asa. It's going to be Chris Cole. It's going to be Brian Huff. And then there's a couple other guys that you can look at, right, that you may have some interest in. I know they went out and went to Keyshawn Flowers High School again today, right? There's a couple other inside linebackers that I know that they like. But it's time to, Bodie Cahoon. I don't mean to leave Bodie off of this conversation, but you've now got your list of guys. It's time to zero in those guys and make sure that you're adding a little bit higher floors to this group. And you need a Kingston, for example. Chris
Yes.
Cole, to me, who's got a little bit higher floor than others just because of how athletic and talented he is. He can do certain things, but there's just a need for that on the defensive line. We talked about already earlier in the week, or last week, or was it this week? We talked about the defensive line. They all kind of bleed. It all kind of bleeds together.
I think we talked about this week. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so that's kind of where they're at. And then linebacker, we talked about who's on the board, Ryan. It's just going to be about, can they close it out? Can they go out there and land the Kingston Viliama Asa? Look, you got to beat Ohio State for him. You have not proven this. One thing this staff has not done consistently is proven that you can beat Ohio State for defensive players.
Yep.
So you got to win that one. You got to prove that one. And so linebacker is going to be the key, because I'm good with a kid like this, but how I feel about it at the end of the day is going to be determined by what else you have in the class. And that's going to be the key moving forward. If you can add some more high floor type of guys, the Kingstons to this, if you had a Kingston Viliama Asa and a Chris Cole with Teddy Rezak, for example, just
Yep.
two guys that I'm very high on. I'm loving this linebacker class.
100%.
Loving it.
Yep.
If the rest of your linebacker class is Bodie Cahoon and Cole Sullivan, I'm a little bit more concerned. You know what I mean? Just for different. Now, again, I don't think Cole Sullivan's a guy's going to end up in Notre Dame. I'm just using an example. And I like Bodie Cahoon, but you get the point that I'm making across the board. It just can't be that.
Yep.
It's time for the staff on defense to start adding some higher end floor guys, along with the high ceiling guys as well. And that's going to determine just how good this defensive class can be. But looking at this without context, Ryan, I get this pickup. This is an athletic kid. And if you're going to take a gamble, you almost always gamble on the kid that can really run. And at the end of the day, Ryan, that's what this comes down to. They see a kid that's long and can flat out fly.
Yeah.
Not just the testing times, but also you pop in the film and you're like, he doesn't look out of place as a safety. He's not going to be a safety at the next level, but as a high school player, he doesn't look out of place as a safety. This kid can cover a lot of ground, and that's what they're banking on.
Well, I mean, I think you hit on the biggest key for me is that if Teddy Rezak is your third linebacker in a class and he's a high upside player, then you feel good about it. I think the concern that Notre Dame fans have, and I totally get this, is that what if you miss on a couple of your top targets and all of a sudden you're like, oh, shoot, son, like, what are we going to do now? And I completely, trust me, folks, I get that response 100%. I understand it. When you don't have Kingston Viliama in the class right now, when you don't have Chris Cole in the class, when you don't have that clarity on who the rest of the class is going to be, then I definitely understand the hesitation and just the pessimism, I guess, about linebacker recruiting. Fully understand it. But I think that is the conclusion that I said that last week, Brian, or earlier this week. I can't remember either, but I think I literally said that same exact sentence. I'm like, if Teddy Rezak is your third linebacker in a class and your other two are studs, like I'm good, man. Like we're okay there, because it's about dependency, right? Like I don't want to have to depend on Teddy having to play early on, like push him into playing time really, really early before he's ready, because he is a developmental player.
Right.
Like he's not a player that should be counted on day one. But Kingston Viliama, if there's an opening at middle linebacker and he's ready to go, I feel like he could do that, like he can make that quicker transition.
And Ryan, this is why what they did at linebacker the last couple of years was so important, because we've talked about this. I have not been told this by any sources. Okay. This is just Brian Driscoll giving his opinion, but knowing this coaching staff the way that I do, it would not shock me if a player like Teddy Rezak, who they've known about for a while, became a lot more attractive to Notre Dame after the spring. And here's why I say that. Going into the spring, you think you hit home runs with Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury and Preston Zinner as a class. You think Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Snead can be those guys, but you need to see them with the pads on. They did great in workouts, but what are they going to do with the pads on? By the end of the spring, the word coming out of my sources, around campus were we hit on this linebacker class in a big way. We love this freshman linebacker class. And of course, Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Snead have a chance to be dudes. And I think the fact that the way Preston Zinter and Drake Bowen finished the spring, because Jaden Osbury, I was told, had a really nice spring like throughout. Drake really came along in the second half of the spring. Preston Zinter struggled just figuring it out, getting comfortable in the defense. But last practice we saw, and then the spring game, he looked really good. They feel they've hit a home run with that class. When you feel that and you look at the fact I just named 5 dudes that you and I had as 4.5-star upside grades or higher in 2 classes, and all 5 of them have 4 years of eligibility remaining, it gives you some leeway to say, hey, we can take a chance on a Teddy Rezak, a Chris Cole, because these, if they hit, they're dudes. If they don't, at least they can give us special teams and depth and things like that. And I think
at least they're still long and athletic, the worst case scenario. Right?
And that's what I'm saying. You hit on the, because now, hey, this kid may not end up ever growing into a starting linebacker.
Yeah.
But you know what this kid's probably going to do for at least 2 to 3 years of his career in college? Be running down on kickoffs and punt coverage.
Being a different version of Bo Bauer.
Because he can fly. That's the thing. And he doesn't have to be 230 and a thumper to do that. And I think that is why I believe this staff is more willing right now to take a flyer on a kid like this, whose film they love, whose athleticism they love. Just, he's a 195-pound linebacker, Ryan. I mean, that's the reality of it.
He might be 195 pounds. Let's be serious.
From what I understood, that's what he's this spring. He's had some different things he's been at where he's got measurements, and I think it was like 6'3.5", 195 was what I was told. 195 is where he's at now. Yeah. He was not 195 on junior film, which is what I think you're referring to, right? Yeah. He was probably 185, 190 on junior film.
Yeah,
you're recruiting to play linebacker. That's risky, but he can run. And because you hit so well in your last 2 classes, this is the kind of kid. And that's part of recruiting, right? I mean, you couldn't take a kid like this if you weren't sure of what you had at linebacker on your current roster. I don't think, or at least it'd be very dangerous. I think what you do in the past helps you do this. I think that's I'm good with it in that regard. Now we just got to see what they finish with.
Yeah. And it very dependent on development at the position, right? Like it's massive, because someone said in the chat, Brian, and I don't disagree. It was like Teddy Rezak's the type of guy that maybe Iowa lands in years past, where he ends up being, a dynamic football player for an Iowa defense. Like how many teams wanted Jack Campbell coming out of high school, for instance, right? And then he goes in the first round. Like that's just kind of, kids have different developmental arcs sometimes. I think that's kind of what you see. And I think Teddy could have that type of arc. Again, you're gambling a little bit there. You are. And this is why you can't fill up a class on nothing but Teddy Rezaks. But I feel like if you are Notre Dame and you're comfortable not only with what your roster is coming back from the linebacker spot, but also you have to kind of be a little bit, I feel like you have to be a little bit confident in where you are with some of the other guys on the board, right? Like you feel like you're in a good spot with a Kingston. You're in a good spot potentially with a Chris Cole if he has a dynamite visit after the unofficial that he just took. Like there is a lot of layers that go into this, but I do think that I understand that there is developmental upside to Teddy. It's just about you have to be comfortable with the coaches, the strength and conditioning development, which I think everybody's confident in that, right? Like I think most people feel like if Teddy Rezak's body can add the weight, Matt Balis is going to put it on him and put it on in the right way. Like you're going to be good on that area most likely. It's just weights, about the playing position.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on the weight too, Ryan, because there's people saying, well, putting on 15, 20 pounds won't be a problem. That's not, they could get him up to 250 if they wanted to. It's never about can you get the weight up. The question for a guy like him is always, can you get the weight up and have strength that matches without taking away from his speed, right? Some guys can get up to 250, Ryan, and get faster, more explosive because their bodies are just built that way. Other guys come out and they put on 10 pounds and they get tight in the hips and they lose flexibility and stuff like that. And that's the question. Him getting up to 225 is not going to be a problem under Matt Balis' program. Can he get up to 225, and will his body allow him to get up to 225 and maintain his flexibility, maintain his explosiveness, maintain his speed? That's what's not the given, right? And I think that's what people need to understand is it's not like Emil Wagner. He's going to have no problem getting up to 300 pounds. Can he get up to 300 pounds of good weight and maintain his athleticism? That's the question.
Right.
Tosh Baker, to me, once he got past about 280, started to lose some of the athleticism we saw from him in high school. And now he doesn't move as well as he did. Now he's 300 pounds. He doesn't move as well as he did in high school. I think that I want people to understand that's the question. It's not about can he put weight on. It's will the athleticism stay at that weight.
Well, and I think a lot of people also think that just when you add weight that you automatically have this great power profile that develops. And that's not always the case because what is the greatest asset that Teddy Rezak brings to the table, to your point, Brian? It's his acceleration, right? It's his explosiveness. If you take the explosiveness away, but you add weight, but what is momentum, right? It's mass times acceleration, right? So if I'm putting on mass, but I'm decreasing the acceleration, my power profile is not going to get that much better. It's just going to kind of even out. So I think all that stuff really matters because to your point, I see a lot of guys at times put on too much weight and they just can't carry it, man. They're just not born to be. I mean, there's a reality where maybe Teddy Rezak is not born to be 220 pounds. That's just a fact that you have to kind of deal with. There is another reality where he can, and he maintains the athleticism. It is a question mark, though, and you can't do a honest assessment without having some question marks in recruiting and in evaluation in general. Doesn't mean they can't, just means that it is a reality that you need to consider when you project, because that's what we're doing right now is we're projecting multi-years forward. I mean, we're talking about a high school junior. We're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. What is Teddy Rezak going to look like?
Ryan, we'll have more on Teddy moving forward. It's a great discussion. There's a lot to like about this kid, but today is not commitment day, right? It's a sample. Today's mailbag day.
Well, today is Teddy's commitment day.
We're gonna not for the show. But I enjoyed talking about this. We had to hit on it. It is a good pickup, and we'll have more on him later. Before we head to the mailbag, though, folks, don't forget it's never too early. You don't have to wait to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell till the end of the show. You can do it now, and you don't have to wait till the end of the show to sign up for boards.irishbreakdown.com either, because we're gonna have a lot going on there as we continue to move forward. But Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
What is Friday really about, man?
It's what about science really about? Class. Oh, mailbag. Sorry.
You're killing me, man. I'm telling you, the sarcasm is really getting over there.
It's mailbag, man. It's always day for
right.
mailbag.
That's right. That's right. We do have mailbags every day, but this is the mailbag show, Ryan.
Yes.
And we got a lot of questions in there already, man. So you ready to get rocking and rolling, buddy? You brace yourself, you do your stretches, your calisthenics, getting ready for the mailbag.
People were in here early, man. Someone beat John A1 to the punch. So people were in here early putting questions, man.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, let's get to it then, man.
Nathan Milton says, how have projection type players, high ceiling, low floor, fared for Notre Dame historically? Do they typically hit their ceiling, stay at their floor, or somewhere in between?
Well, number one, it varies player by player, but you're always going to have, and this is, Ryan, you and I have talked about this with the D-line class last year. The problem with taking a bunch of these guys and relying on a bunch of low floor, high ceiling guys is the success rate is inherently going to be smaller. Unless you are just the greatest evaluators in the history of football, you're going to have a lower hit rate with these players. You're going to have your Jeremiah, and these are the guys that we point to every time someone cries about taking a 3-star guy. It's like, look, there's a long list of these guys, right? I mean, you go back to Tyler Eifert. He was a 3-star kid coming out. I mean, Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa. It's a very long list of guys that you look at and say they've had a ton. Joe Alt, they've had a ton of these guys hit, right? But there's also a ton of them that either were role players or never did anything at Notre Dame. And that rate is going to be higher. It's always going to be higher with those kind of guys because you are projecting, and sometimes guys don't pan out. Some kids, as they grow, their body kind of it gets a little more, I'm trying to say, fragile, right? Because they
can't carry the weight.
Yeah. And they just break down a little bit easier, and that's always a risk with a guy that is got a body type. And a guy like you look at a guy like Boubacar Traore, right? Great traits, but is he going to develop the instincts, the technique? Those are all unknown. Some will, some won't. For every Adetokunbo Ogundiji that pans out, there's 3 or 4 other D linemen that never got to their full potential or the potential that the staff thought that they could get to. So Notre Dame has done very well the last 10 years and finding and identifying, well, really the last 15 years, at finding and identifying these players. And some of the guys, Benjamin Morrison's an example. When Notre Dame landed him, he was a 3-star recruit. Now, he eventually became a 4-star by everybody except On3, but nobody had him in the top 300. The Notre Dame staff said, I don't care what the rankings are. We like that kid. But for every Benjamin Morrison, there's a Jalen Brown, there's a Low Wood, there's this other 3-star guy that was a 3-star guy. And then there's the guys that did have the high ceilings that never panned out, those type of players. And sometimes those guys that have those high ceilings do reach a plateau because, like he says, do they hit their ceiling? Do they stay at their floor? Somewhere in between. Ramon Henderson, for me, is sort of in between. He's not at his floor anymore. He's a quality football player, but he hasn't hit his ceiling yet either. So he's somewhere in between. Where DJ Brown is hit his ceiling. He is who he is. Ramon Henderson's a guy that still has room to grow. But at this point in time, Ryan, he's a senior now. You start to wonder, is that jump going to happen? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And those are the things you look at. And every kid hits it at a different stage, right? Like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah needed a couple years. Now, he would have played in 2018 and been a good special teams player and a backup guy, but he wasn't ready to be a stud in 2018. He needed year 3. Joe Alt needed half of his freshman season to start to show that ability. You know what I mean? And it just varies. But you can't just – like people have said this, right? And these are people that tend to be on my side of the recruiting rankings aisle. You give me a team of the best 3 stars and name this list of guys, and we're going to be able to go compete for championship. Probably not. Because the reality is if you do have a team of 85 low floor, high ceiling guys, you're going to have a lot of guys that don't pan out. And there's going to be a big gap in between the top of your depth chart and the bottom of your depth chart. That's just the reality of it. You need some guys that are high floor guys that maybe don't have high ceilings. You need some guys that have both high floors and high ceilings. You need your Michael Mayers as well. You need your Kyle Hamiltons as well. You have to be able to mix those guys up with your Cam Harts and guys like that. And so like Dalen Hayes never was the player that we had hoped he would be upside wise. But you know what Dalen Hayes was the minute he stepped on foot on campus? A good football player.
Yeah.
He didn't get a ton better, but he was just a good football player for 4 years. You need guys like that, right? And so there has to be that balance when you're putting a class together. And that's the comment I made earlier, Ryan, is, okay, you've got some really good high floor guys in this class. Your high ceiling guys in this class. The next few commitments, I need some higher floors with some of these guys, right? I need a Caleb Beasley. I need a Kingston Viliama Asa. I need a Justin Scott. I need a DeJuan Lane, a Jalen McClain, who you had some big news on today, Ryan. So if you didn't hear that, go to irishbreakdown.com. Ryan talked to Jalen McClain today, and he has actually set up an official visit to Notre Dame, which shocked us because
to our surprise, yes.
Yes. I mean, you talked to him recently, Ryan, and it was just like, it is what it is with Notre Dame. But so the fact that he set up a visit certainly is positive. And so you have to strike the balance, Ryan, because you're always going to have a lower success rate with those guys as far as panning out and hitting their ceilings.
Yes. And I mean, when you're talking about the NFL draft version of this, Nathan, it's the boomer bust players, right? And you don't want to same thing Brian just said. You do not want to load up an NFL draft class on boomer bust prospects. You know why? Because there's a high variance there. Either most of them are going to hit and you're going to look like a genius, or none of them are going to hit and you're going to get fired in a couple of years. Like that's kind of how this thing works. It's not usually, you named one, Brian, right? It's like Ramon Henderson's kind of in that middle ground, but most guys never find that middle ground. Either it's whole ceiling or it's all floor. And you don't really find as much middle ground with those guys that are high ceiling, low floor guys. And that's the scary part of this evaluation at times. That's why you don't want to load up on a bunch of these guys. You want to pick and choose your spots where you can take a gamble on some players. So I think that is a roster building strategy from college football to NFL and everything in between as far as how to build. You don't want to just load up on guys that you know the floors, because sometimes those guys are also a little bit of lower ceiling type of players. Maybe that you max them out a little bit quicker. Teddy Rezak can be a very good player at Notre Dame, or he's going to be a player that is just kind of there, right? Like he's in the room and he's fine, like he's good, but he's never maybe a difference maker, or he could be. There's a high variance to him as a player, in my opinion.
So Ryan, so there was a comment down here from that Matt McCarthy made, which I liked, and I want to kind of discuss it because it adds to this conversation here. So I'll have you read this real quick while I'm looking up the specifics of that class.
Yeah, Matt says Notre Dame had 5 3-stars in the 2016 class to make it to the NFL. Ade Ogundeji, Ian Book, Jalen Elliott, Julian Love, and Jameer Jones.
And it would have been 6 if not for Kevin Stefferson getting in trouble, because I believe he's looking at the 247 composite list. Yeah. And and you're correct, but here's the point. So they had 5 that made it, but let's see, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that didn't make it. Right. I mean, so again, that's the whole point. But this point, Matt's comment points to the fact that Notre Dame has had success with guys like this. Now, not all those guys were consensus 3 stars. Jalen Elliott, for example, I know off the top of my head was a 4-star with Rivals, and I believe some of those other guys were. I believe Julian Love had at least one service that had him as a 4-star. I could be wrong on that. I'm actually going to check now, so just give me 1 second. I thought there was one. Yeah, Rivals also had him as a 4-star. Now, they weren't top 250 guys, but it's not like they were these, who the heck is that guy type of prospects. But to your point, some of those guys were high-ceiling guys, right? Like Jameer Jones, to me, was not the guy we're talking about, though, right? He was a 3-star example, but Adi Tagumba Ogundeji was a low-floor, high-ceiling guy. Ian Book was not. Yep. Ian Book was just a solid player. Jalen Elliott, low floor, high ceiling, because he never really played DB. Julian Love was similar to low floor, high ceiling. He was playing running back, returning kicks. You looked at you saw some upside there, and that kind of fits more into what we're talking about here, right? Like Jack Kaiser's not a low floor, high ceiling guy. Jack Kaiser was a high floor, lower ceiling guy because he had some physical traits that you just couldn't fix. He's not going to grow 3 inches and get 5 more inches on his wingspan. But Jack Kaiser is a guy that you knew at the very least was going to be what he's been at Notre Dame, right? And he's been a solid football player. Then there's the guys that are like a Jalen Sneed, who to me has a little bit of a higher floor than you'd think, but also still raw to reach his full potential because at least athletically he's going to help you to some degree. And what I like about this current staff, Ryan, is we're seeing them err more on the side of that, the toolsy guy, as opposed to the really steady, 3-star kid that's going to come and be a high effort guy and stay out of trouble and outplay his ranking. That's different than the low floor, high ceiling guy.
Well, every 3 stars created differently. Like there are 3 stars for different situations. To your point, like some guys are a little bit more maxed out, and there's 3-star level player. Some guys are only 3 stars because they have a lot of room of growth that needs to happen moving forward, to your point.
Right. It's a good way of putting it, Ryan. Very good way of putting it. I like that.
Next question from John A1. What's up, John? If the talent between quarterbacks is even, do the Notre Dame quarterbacks have an advantage playing in South Bend in bad weather in late October, November? Are there things the quarterback coaches will teach technically for inclement weather?
Sure. I mean, if it's inclement weather, it depends on what kind of inclement weather we're talking about. Some things you can replicate, others you can't. If I'm in an area of the country that just doesn't rain much, and I'm looking at the weather forecast and we're traveling over somewhere and it's going to rain in South Bend this weekend, there's plenty I can do. I can get a bucket out there and literally dip the ball in the bucket every single time they're about to snap. Or I can, which I think is more realistic, is pour water onto it every couple plays, right? And then that's how you work on that. Okay. There's different things you can do. You can wet you can find if you have one of your grass fields, you don't mind getting a little bit ripped up, you can wet your field a little bit and get a practice in on a wet field. I think that's important to do that. I remember, Ryan, once when I was coaching, well, you'll be familiar with this. When I was at Muhlenberg, I was playing at Moravian, which I know you've heard of Moravian, and it was a grass field, and we had gotten really bad rain and snow, and it was pure mud. So we literally spent the entire pregame working on how to cut in the mud. We won 8-0, and my running back went for 150 yards on 30-some carries, and I can't tell how many times he kind of stopped in the mud as like 3 guys went sliding past him.
Hydroplane.
Right? Yeah, because they didn't know how to cut in the mud. It was like sink your base, widen your hips, make quick, choppy steps. Don't try to plant and go. And, the linebackers are running at him, and he kind of slows down, and they can't slow down because they're running full speed. Just go right by him, right?
Yeah.
There's things like that you can prepare for. What's harder to prepare for is cold. So I don't care what USC wants to do. If they're going to come out here and play Notre Dame and it's going to be 30, there's nothing they can do to – I mean, you can't get your inside facility that cold.
They're going
You
to go
can't
chill in
fake
some
snow.
freezers. They're going to go to
Right.
7-Eleven and just sit in the
Yeah,
freezers
unless
for
you're
a
going to
couple
put them in a
hours.
bus and like take them out to like, the Bear Mountain or something like that and try to practice
Yeah.
out there, a few hours away. So it's like my wife grew up in San Diego, but she did ski patrol. And I remember her telling me that when we were dating. I was like, hold on a second. I didn't believe her. I think this chick's lying to me. You're from San Diego. How did you do ski patrol? Did you like move to Utah during the? No, she's like, no, like about an hour and a half away, there's a mountain range and there's this place called Bear Mountain that has a ski resort. I'm like, oh, I had no clue. So maybe if they're going to do something like that and practice out there, I guess, but they're not going to do that. Right. So that's a little harder to prepare for. And that is something that Notre Dame has an advantage on because they can have an outdoor practice. They can have the quarterbacks go out there and do pregame or, do warm-ups in the cold to get used to it. Because the difference is like a football when it's wet is just it's slippery, it's slick. There's things you can do. The problem with cold is your hands, like your skin sort of condenses, right? And so it's not that your hand gets smaller, but your skin gets a little tighter, which makes it even harder to grip the ball if you don't have really big hands. And it just getting used to staying loose in that type of weather can be a challenge. Now, Ryan, for you, it's not a challenge. You played football in New Jersey, right? It's just something you guys are used to. I grew up in Ohio, but I moved to Virginia Beach. And so I played my 4 years of high school football in Virginia Beach, and I played my freshman year of college in North Carolina. And it was just kind of like we played a game up in New Jersey when I was in college, and I'm like, this is for the birds, man. Like I just, I just wasn't used to it by then. And there's nothing that we could do in practice to replicate it being 35 degrees. And so I think that's where you can have an advantage. But like elements, rain, snow, things like that, that's not really, you can prepare for that. It's because all snow does is just make the ball wet. It doesn't impact your ability to play unless it's covered in snow, but that's no different than playing in mud. And it doesn't really, impact the turf field all that much. Not the field turf the way that it is now. It'll mat down in it more than like the old school field turf, the old school AstroTurf. But the cold is the one thing to me, Ryan. And wind, that's another thing. You can't replicate wind. If you're from, Jacksonville, Florida, and you're going to go up and play the Giants, I don't know if they have the technology nowadays where you can make your practice facility 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts. Something like that you can't prepare for. But cold and wind is about what you can't prepare for. But moisture is something I think is something you certainly can do.
I remember the Eagles played in a snow game a few years ago when LaShawn McCoy was still on the team, and he was the only guy that day that looked like he was just running on a regular turf that day, man. He was just phenomenal in the snow. And he's a Pittsburgh guy, right? So it makes sense. He's used to kind of the different climates, obviously, of the Northeast. So I agree, man. I think that there are some things that you can prepare for without a doubt. And then there's other things that it's just where you grew up and where your body has kind of gotten used to type of situation. Like snow for me, I'm fine. But if you dump me down in Florida and I'm like 110-degree heat every single day in 2-a-days, then I'm probably not going to be acclimating as well as some of the Florida guys down there even, So I think it works both ways, honestly.
All right. Good question, John. It's a very good question. Let's get to, here we go.
Next question is from Domer Grizz. Said, happy Friday. You too. What do cornerbacks do in the summer to work on their craft besides 7-on-7? Are there drills they do while the quarterbacks and wide receivers are working on their timing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of drills they can do. I mean, footwork drills, read drills, strength drills, handwork, footwork drills, release drills. I mean, if you're doing it right, if you're doing your off-season training right, you're spending more time doing drills than you are doing 7-on-7s and 1-on-1s. I mean, you're still doing a lot of that, but you're doing a ton of drill work. I mean, just working on that first step, just really working on our plant step, just really working on the timing of that first step. And I'm a big believer in having kids spend their off season doing everything that you need them to do, but also compartmentalizing certain things. I'm a big believer in that, Ryan. So like, hey, really work on that first step when you're going to press. Don't just go out there and do it all. Just work on that first step, reset. Work on that first step, reset. Okay, now have the guy make this move. Okay, bam, bam. Right? Getting that second hand involved. Work on getting your hand slapped away and getting it back on there. Just taking each individual aspect of it. So if you were to take a cornerback playing press man and take that whole rep from a game, I'd say take all the different traits that he needs, and you need to have drills that speak to each of those, and they need to work on those, right? So that first step, then working on hand fighting. So just have two guys standing side by side and just have them hand fighting. That's it. Just, what are you going to do? What if he does this? What if he does that? What if he does this? And I'm doing that with my receivers too. I'm getting those. I'm getting over there and I'm just doing all types of stuff. I'm grabbing the jersey. I'm tugging on this. I'm doing this. And they need to learn how to fight that, how to beat that. Because I don't want to hear, well, he grabbed my jersey, coach. Well, we practiced on this all freaking off season and all in fall camp on how to get off of a guy grabbing your jersey. Right. And here's the other thing. If you'd have done a better job at the line of scrimmage, he wouldn't have been able to grab your jersey, you know? So there's always those things that you got to teach and work on. And then there's things where if you can't get him off of your jersey and the ball comes, there's ways to attack the football to make it obvious to the referees that this guy's holding your jersey. You practice that stuff too. Football is a very compartmentalized thing as far as the building blocks of getting you to play where you need to play. And that's what the summer is great for, Ryan. It's a great time for that. And, you know, like when I'd have my receivers run drills, I didn't have them work on 5-yard outcuts, 10-yard outcuts, 15-yard outcuts. I had them work on top ends at 5 yards. Here's your top end, right? Here's you're doing a million. You don't need to run 15-yard top end, speed cuts. You'll need to run 15-yard curl routes because the top end is the same as a hitch, right? It's the same as a stop at 12. It's the same as a stop at 20. You work on those top ends because it's about maximizing that specific trait. Then you can work on the other parts when you get into the one-on-ones and you get into the 7-on-7. Now we can work on the depths and the distances and things like that. But you're compartmentalizing it when it comes to the drill work. And that's stuff that you spend a lot of time doing in the off season.
A lot of defensive backs that I've been around always used to go to the beach during the summer because they used to like to do all their footwork stuff in the sand because of it's more resistance, obviously, right? Like it's harder to get a good grip. It's harder to be consistently in and out of your pedal, to break in and out of breaks, those types of things. And they used to love it, man. Like I know they used to really do it because that was just one thing where it forces you to have as crisp as footwork as possible and to maintain good bend in your hips and to be able to sink properly and do all those types of things. Because if you're in sand and you are working on your back pedal, let's say, and you're working on breaking towards the line of scrimmage and you are not playing with a good base and your hips are too high, you are not going to change direction very well. Like that's just kind of the thing. So I think resistance is another thing that people use a lot in the offseason. That's why you see in the weight room, they'll use the resistance bands and the chains and all that type of stuff as well. But I've known a lot of defensive backs that used to just, even if they weren't close to a beach, they would just design their summer break around when they're not with the team, going to the beach, not for pleasure, just for the everyday grind of practicing on the beach because the sand, I know, was a big thing that they loved.
Yep. And we had a super chat down here from Brandon Plensner I wanted to bring up.
Brandon says, how would you grade a safety class of Kennedy Urlacher, DeJuan Lane, and Paul Menke Jr.? Do you think they should or will take 4? How do you see a safety class shaking out?
You know, Ryan, I'd be a little torn on that one for exactly what we talked about at the beginning of the show. I'd like the upside of that group. I like Kennedy Urlacher's upside. Paul Menke to me is a little bit more of a high floor, lower ceiling guy. To me, I don't know. You may feel differently, Ryan. DeJuan Lane is a top 100 player in my view. I mean, I think a lot higher of DeJuan Lane than the National Recruiting Services. Him and Jalen McClain both. I think one service now has Jalen in the top 100.
105 is his top
105 is his highest. Okay.
Yeah.
He should be higher than that
yes.
to me, but 105 is it's splitting hairs, right? It's like, okay, you see him 15 spots off, and when you're talking about that, it's no problem.
Yeah,
like 2 others have him as a 3-star. That's absurd. That's just silly.
Stupid.
That's just dumb.
Yeah,
but I'd be a good class, Ryan. It would be a class that keeps the gap from widening, but it wouldn't necessarily be a gap closing class to me. You could make a case that makes you slightly, but to me, it's just okay. It's just keep doing, you're just still doing the same thing, right? Like DeJuan Lane, I like a lot. You give him 1. Kennedy, to me, there's just too much. There's just too many variables with that trio. Like is DeJuan Lane gonna outgrow safety? There's always things like that. There's always
sure.
So it would make me a little nervous, to be honest with you. I'd like the class, I would, but I don't know that I would love that class or think that it's necessarily a gap closing class. But the good thing is it would prevent the gap from widening, in my opinion. I do think that. I do think that.
Well, I think that you would get a lot of length from that class specifically, and
Sure.
a lot of playmaking ability. Because I mean, Dewan Lane is 6'3", 195 pounds. Paul Mankey is listed at 6'2", but then you see him pictures like next to Marcus Freeman, and you're like, that dude is towering over Marcus Freeman. Like, so I don't know exactly what Paul's height is, but he's a pretty tall dude. And I mean, Kennedy Urlacher is the shortest of that group, and even he's like 6', 6'1", somewhere in that ballpark, right? So like, it's not like he's a short guy by any means, or a lacks length. Like, he has good length for the position. I would like that class. I really would. I mean, it would obviously be dependent, because I agree with you. It would be dependent on development. But one thing that we've talked about is that Chris O'Leary is a pretty good developer at
That's
the
a good
safety
point.
position. So like,
That's a really good point,
okay,
Ryan. He could do a lot with this group. You're right.
yes. I feel like he could get a lot out of Dewan Lane's ability, a whole lot out of Dewan Lane.
Here's my counter argument. Can you justify keeping him around if this is the best he can do from a recruiting standpoint?
It's fair.
I think it's good enough to keep him around for at least another year, for sure. Because you said it is a good side. I have Kennedy Urlacher as a 4-star recruit. I'm like top 250-ish kind of guy. I have not graded Menke. Probably a 4-star guy, probably. He's a good player. And Dewan Lane's a top 100 guy. So, I mean, there's some stuff there to work with. But again, what's the standard we're referring to? For me, this is for me. Is this going to help you go beat Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State? That's how I look at a class. And to me, this class doesn't necessarily do that. But I think where you sort of got me, Ryan, was kind of like, ooh, when you're in an argument with someone and you think you're winning and they say something and you kind of have that, ooh, that's got to make me think again.
Never happened to me before.
Shut up. Not that you and I are having an argument, but the counter that you made to that is a really great point, Ryan. Like, there's some tools for a guy like Chris O'Leary who's shown he can coach,
right,
to work with there, man. There really are. There really
that
are.
happens to me. That happens to me versus my wife all the time. Where I'm just like, all right, I quit. I'm sorry.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a genuine response that somebody makes where you're like, that's a really good point. Like, that's actually like, I was feeling this way. You made that counter argument. Now I'm feeling this way. Not like okay, I realize even though I may be right, I'm not winning this argument. So I'm just going to bow out. That's not what I'm talking about. You can tell what conversations you were having today before the show, apparently.
Today's a good day, sir.
Okay, good. Very good. Very good. All right, let's get to some more.
Next question from John A1. On the current roster, which defensive lineman has the highest ceiling overall? Which players can reach their ceilings in 2020 or reach their ceiling in 2023?
That is a good question. Who would you say of the non-freshman current defensive lineman, Ryan, has the highest ceiling? Because I know who my pick would be.
Joshua Burnham.
Okay, we're on the same page.
Mine. Yeah.
Will he reach that in 23? No, he won't. He'll hopefully start to flash it, but he won't reach his ceiling in 2023.
It's probably more 2024, 2025 type of outlook for it. I'm interested to see. Did you have Jason Onye as a 5-star upside guy?
4.5 star.
4.5
star. Yeah, I loved his upside. I did, and I still don't see future first-round draft pick, future early day two draft pick yet. But I love the tools. There's a lot of upside there, right? I mean, and that's the thing, Ryan, that you and I have talked a lot about. There's a lot of upside on this D-line. Forget the incoming freshman class who we've talked about. 3 of the 4 got 5-star upside grades. I mean, you're talking about you're talking about Josh Burnham, Aiden Gobira, Tyson Ford in that younger class. You talk about Jason Onye. Riley Mills, I still think has a very high ceiling. He's like that Ramon Henderson type. Has he peaked out where he's just not going to get to what I thought his ceiling was? Or is there another jump coming for him? We don't know the answer to that.
I think Jordan Patelhose is still a high ceiling guy, in my opinion. I would put him that way.
He's another guy that could tap into that. You hope this year. There's a lot of guys like that. And then you bring in the incoming freshman class with Brandon Vernon and Boubacar Traore and Armel Mukam and Devin Houston. And there's a lot of high ceilings. But to John's point, how many of those guys are going to come? How close are some of those guys going to get to that? I don't need Josh Burnham to reach his ceiling in 2023. I don't need Tyson Ford to do that. Aiden Gobira, the freshman class. They just need to not look like disappointments, right? And start to take steps with the sophomores. We need to see if Notre Dame's going to be the team that we think they can be, Ryan. We need the Jordan Patelhos, the Riley Millses, the Jason Onyes, Javante Jean-Baptistes. We need those guys to say, okay, this is where we think your ceiling is. It's time to get there.
Right.
And I think that ultimately will determine how good this defensive line is. Not the Burnhams and guys like that. It's the juniors and seniors. It's the Onyes, the Mills, the Patelhos, those guys. The more of those guys that get close to their ceilings this year, that's what's gonna make this D line go from being what I expect to be a good D line to a really good D line. Right now, I think it's going to be good. It's going to be a solid D line as of what we know of the players as of what they've already shown. It's going to be good, right? Yeah. We've seen this D line go out and play against South Carolina. I mean, that's what they had against South Carolina. Right? It was basically the current defensive line.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's who they had. It was Mills. It was Cross. It was Botelho. It was Nana. It was those because Foskey was gone. Right. Adamiola was gone. The only guy that we saw play in that game that we're not going to see a lot of now is Justin Adamiola and Chris Smith, but we saw a lot of all the other guys. Had a good day for the most part. Had some ups and downs, but it was an overall good day. We've seen that group. They're going to be good.
Yeah.
Are they going to be really good? That's going to be determined by if they start to reach their ceilings. And it won't be the freshman class and the sophomores, to me, that determine that. It's the juniors and seniors.
I think Jordan Botelho would be my pick to the guy that reaches his ceiling this year, hopefully. Because, I mean, usually there's sometimes, Brian, where that last game of the season, the previous year, the bowl games are big kind of insights into what a guy's going to do the following season. And, I mean, Jordan Botelho had 10 quarterback hurries and 2 sacks in that football game. So if he's able to create that, keep that momentum going into next season as a fourth-year player now going into – I think that Jordan Botelho could have a big year, but I think Riley Mills is a really interesting pick as well. I do.
The more I agree with you saying, Ryan, I'm not disagreeing. I'm adding to it. The more of those guys that get there, the better this line's going to be. It can't just be Jordan if this team wants to be a title contender. It can't just be Riley. It has to be both of them.
Right.
Because I feel like we know what we're going to get from Howard Cross. It needs to be if that entire group can kind of start getting, or at least most of that group can get there, then that's how I'm gonna start feeling really good about it.
I agree. Next question is from Sam Hartman 10 for Heisman, who used to be TB12 for Heisman.
That's right.
Question: What are your thoughts on Antonio Carter, and where does Notre Dame stand with him? Antonio Carter, of course, is the grad transfer safety from Rhode Island.
So he's still on his visit to Notre Dame.
Yep.
He won't be done, I think, until tomorrow, right, Ryan?
Tomorrow, correct.
And so, there's a lot of work to be done, but Notre Dame is, I'll just say this, Notre Dame is so far doing a great job on that visit so far. They're absolutely crushing it. So Notre Dame is going to be a big-time player for this kid when it's all said and done. That I'm confident in saying, Ryan. But until the visit's over, there's not a lot we can say and will say because, visits have to be completed before you say those things. But, I know you've reached out to him during the visit and we've talked to sources and things are going pretty well so far. And he's blowing up, Ryan. I mean, in the last week, he's gotten offers from like LSU and Florida, and he's got a really impressive offer list. There's no doubt about that. He's a very coveted player. The question is going to be, what does he want to play?
Yes.
Because he's being offered. I mean, depending on the school, he's being recruited to play like 4 different positions. Yes. I mean, if you really want to talk 2 safeties, boundary corner, and then nickel.
Well, I mean, going into the visit, I had last weekend, I had a little bit of an update on him for people that haven't seen the piece. So basically, to Brian's, kind of analysis there, is Ole Miss sees him, for instance, because he went on a visit to Ole Miss and he went on a visit to Wisconsin. Wisconsin likes him as a pure outside corner. That's where they see him. Ole Miss likes him as kind of a hybrid nickel player, a guy that can move around a little bit. Notre Dame is recruiting him as a safety, but also can do other things potentially on the back end. So there's a lot of different outlooks to him. And I think going into the visit, and this was in my piece, so this isn't a secret, that Antonio said that Wisconsin was a team that was really standing out to him. Like that was kind of the team going into the visit. I think Notre Dame has a chance, obviously, to narrow that gap and hopefully take everything over with the rest of the visit going as well as it started, it seems. And I think that it would be a good pickup because to your question for me, this kid's a versatile player on the back end. I spoke to a former linebacker at Rhode Island that played with Antonio Carter, and the first thing that he said when I asked his opinion on him was he's one of the best tacklers I've ever seen. And that was a linebacker talking about a guy that played corner. Like, just put that into perspective a little bit. So
Yeah.
I think he would bring a lot of versatility. A guy that's played outside corner, that tells you could probably do some stuff working in the slot as a man-on-man cover guy at points. He's a good tackler, and he's 6'1", 200 pounds, so he has a good frame to work with as well.
And I think that right there is why why Notre Dame thinks he can play safety, because he is such a strong tackler. There's no doubt. Here's a fun question, Ryan. I like to mix up some fun questions as we kind of go through this as well. Where was that question? I had a really fun one here.
Is it a Tommy Guns question? I love Tommy Guns questions.
It's this one. It's this one. We get something like this often, and I like to bring them up every now and then because it is kind of fun. And I don't know that you and I have had this conversation. I know Vince and I have had this conversation, but I don't know if you and I have.
Corey Norman says, if you could change one play of Notre Dame history, what would it be? Mine would be reversing the Bush push. Ooh,
for me, it's the reason it would not be the Bush push for me is that'd be a great win, but I don't think Notre Dame wins the title that year. I don't think they can beat Texas. It'd be a good game, but I don't think they could have beat Texas. There's no way they were stopping. I mean, Michigan State hung 40 on that defense that year, right? Like, what would Vince Young have done to that defense? The one for me is the field goal. The missed field is the field goal by Boston College, David Gordon against Boston College. If I could change one play, I'd have him miss that. It was the last game of the year. Notre Dame would have finished undefeated. They would have played for the national championship. They would have, I don't know who they would have played. They may still have played Texas A&M based on the bowl games, but maybe they would have played Tennessee or Nebraska. I'm not quite sure what the bowl tie-ins were that year. But if Notre Dame goes into the postseason undefeated and then beats Texas A&M, and I believe Texas A&M that year was a top 5 team. Let me just go ahead and look at that real quick. I believe Texas A&M was a top 5 team that year. If Notre Dame goes into the Cotton Bowl and beats a top 5 football team, they were ranked 7th. A&M was ranked 7th. So if Notre Dame beats them, and here's the other thing too, I think Notre Dame was a little deflated in that game. If you go back and watch that game, they were a little deflated in that game, especially in the first half, because they had lost out on the chance to play for a championship. Notre Dame is number 1 going into that game. I think they wiped the mat with Texas A&M. I really do. So that's my thing, is because that's the play to me, even more than I've seen somebody say the punt return against Colorado. Is it a given that Notre Dame would have won a title that year if they'd beat Colorado? I don't think that it is. I mean, that was 1990. That Notre Dame team still had 2 losses. They still lost to Stanford. They still lost to Penn State. Now, they were ranked number 5, but I don't think they go from 5 to number 1, with 2 losses. Right. That's just my opinion. Now, again, those were flawed teams. Colorado wasn't a great team that year. Georgia Tech had a tie, I think, that year. So maybe they do, but I don't think so. There's no brainer that if they beat Boston College and then beat A&M or whoever they played a bowl game, that they're the national champs because they'd have been undefeated. So to me, that's the one for me. That's a no-brainer. Now, again, I know for you, Ryan, it's going to be different because I don't think, were you even alive that year? Were you like just born?
What year was it?
93? Were you like just born, right?
2. I was 2.
You were 2? You were born 91? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you're 32?
I'm 31. I'll be 32
So
this
you'll
year.
be 32. Okay, gotcha. Correct. I thought you were 30.
Yep. In October.
Yeah, okay. Note to self. Ryan's birthday's in October. Okay. But yeah, that would have been that'd be the one for me. That's definitely the one for me.
I think the 2 that I can remember vividly is one is the Bush push, because that just kind of broke my heart at that point. I was like 14 and I was like, that sucks, man. That's just not fun. The other one is, what year was it, Brian, where the against Clemson, the with Everett Golson, where on the goal line, or not Everett Golson, it was
Kaiser.
DeShone Kaiser, yeah,
on the 2-point conversion.
Yeah, that broke my heart there, man, because that was it, man. That was gonna be game, brother. That was it.
So let me ask you this question: Would you have had him? Would you have changed that play, or would you have had Kelly kick the extra point the first time they tried to go for 2? Because then you're kicking an extra point right there, and you've got all the momentum going into overtime.
I feel like I just would have changed that last play. I think
because that would have tied it. Yeah, that would have tied it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was especially because I heard a interview that DeShone Kaiser did recently where he was talking about that play where they had it lined up and they were going to run quarterback power, but then they changed it last second to that play they
had already showed.
Yes.
That was
exactly.
that was the dumb part about it.
Yeah. So it was yeah, man, winning that game again. That team was flawed, right? Like there was obviously an obvious flaw in that team. So would it change drastically that season as much? But
I
it
mean,
may have caused some
dude,
momentum moving forward a little bit, though,
because
man. To
here's the
beat
thing.
Clemson in that year.
You win that game, you're ranked number 1 or 2 going into Stanford at the end of the year. How does that game shape up if Notre Dame's got a national title berth, a playoff berth on the line? That's the question you got to ask yourself. And that's the thing that always kind of factors into some of these decisions. Does this thing equal this? Like, does it lead to this? What does it lead to? What changes about that team if the outcome is different?
Right.
I see a lot of people talking about the penalty against Florida State, the phantom pick play against Florida State in 14. Does that Notre Dame team implode the way that it does if they beat Florida State? I don't know, but that team was pretty flawed by the end of it. So
it was, but that pick play was very, very terrible.
Terrible. I've said this. What happens if Dane Chris doesn't hurt his knee against Tulsa? How does that season finish? There's 2 ways to look at it. One is you beat Tulsa, but do you finish the way that they finished, where they run the table? Like, there's always those different things that I've heard people say, man, if Dane Chris doesn't get hurt. I've said this, if Dane Chris doesn't get knocked out, if he doesn't get that concussion against Michigan in 2010, they beat Michigan that year. They were working Michigan, and then he got hurt. Michigan took a lead. Then he comes back in, and they take the lead back.
Yeah.
So that would be it'd be an interesting one. Somebody said the Tyler Buckner injury against Marshall. That'd be fascinating. It'd be very fascinating.
I saw someone said the EQ when they weren't able to hit that EQ pass against Miami that one year. Yeah. That was
Brian. I have said this, and I'll say this till the day that I die. No one's going to change my opinion. If Brandon hits Equanimous on that post route on drive 1, and they jump up on Miami 7-0 like that game's over. They win that game. And that Notre Dame team, they definitely beat Stanford at the end of the year, because that team was just, they had kind of given up after that game. That team was just, they were tapped out.
I also hated the one play that I wish I could take back, but I don't know how much it would have altered that game, because it wouldn't have been like the game over. But remember the fake field goal, Michigan State with Charlie Gantz for the win?
Oh, the Little Giants one in 11?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Or that was 2010.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, I was talking about the one where I think, 2010. Yeah, that was the one.
Little Giants one.
Was Connor Cook the quarterback at that point? I think maybe, or was that 2?
I believe so, but he didn't throw that touchdown pass, did he?
No, he didn't. No, it was a field goal team, and they threw it to Charlie Gant down the middle of the field.
Yeah, that was that, and Harrison Smith fell down. Yeah, that was brutal. That was brutal. That one hurt. That one stung. I was at that game, by the way, Ryan. That one stung. That one definitely stung.
It sure did. Because Charlie Gant just completely tossed him aside. I was like, that's got to be something, man.
Yeah, it's got to be something, bro. Come on now. Yeah. Yeah, Le'Veon Bell was on that team. They had a really good backfield that year. Edwin Baker, Keyshawn Martin, and Le'Veon Bell.
They did
Kirk Cousins was their quarterback, by the way. Kirk Cousins was their quarterback.
Kirk Cousins was a quarterback at that point. Got it. Yeah.
BJ Cunningham was a receiver. Keyshawn Martin was a receiver for them.
Hey, man, all those quarterbacks were the same guy. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they pretty much were. You're not wrong. You're not
Except
wrong.
for Drew Stanton. Drew Stanton was the only one that was any different. They were all pocket quarterbacks other than Stanton.
Yep. That was a good one. All right. Let's get to some more. But I like questions like that on Friday. They're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. Here we go.
Next question is from M. Rent 520. Which of the summer enrollees has the best chance of making a similar impact as Benjamin Morrison? I personally am excited to see what Brendan Vernon is going to do.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see what Brendan and Boubacar, because we haven't seen Boubacar in a while, Ryan. I mean, it's like he was injured. He hardly any film. That high school does nothing to promote their players. They're actually the opposite. They they resist any attempts to try to get anything to help us promote their players. It's really weird.
Yes. They're very hush-hush that round. For some reason.
Very uncooperative and unhelpful so far, which, we'll hopefully still try and do some things to fix that. But he's a bit of an unknown, so I'm curious to see him. But for me, the summer enrollee that I think has a chance to have I don't know if any of them are going to have a Benjamin Morrison type of impact where they're starters by game 4, essentially.
American and
yeah. But the one that I think that I look at and say, boy, I'd love for this guy to be that guy is Jeremiah Love. I think
it's a good one.
Jeremiah Love has a chance. Not only is he an outstanding player, but the depth chart is a little bit more favorable now because you've got, obviously, Logan Diggs is gone and Darian Price has kind of got some of the issues he's had from from an injury standpoint, stuff like that. But, to me, Ryan, he's a guy that has home run ability. He has the
Yep.
ability to come in as a freshman, make an impact. He's not going to be like an every down back. He's not going to be 15 plus touches a game, but get him 5 to 7 touches a game. Let him return some punts or kicks or whatever. Get the football in that kid's hands because he's got a chance to be a Josh Adams type fresh. That's what I see when I see Jeremiah Love. I could see him having a Josh Adams type freshman year. Long, explosive, fast. Get him behind that offensive line. Get him 5, 6 touches a game. He's going to average like 8, 9 yards a carry, because he's going to rip a big one off or something like that. Throw him the football and let him go do his thing. And then if by the end of the year he's getting more touches, he happens to be your number 2 at that point in time, so be it. But that would be my best bet for incoming freshman. And then the other one is the guy that I could see being the freshman All-American. To me, there's one incoming freshman who's not there yet. Ryan, you know where I'm going with this. Yeah. Go ahead and say it. He's
Charles Jagasaw. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I mean, because let's be honest about this, right? You have Billy Schrouth, who is a potentially dynamic offensive guard, but the other guard spot, we're talking about a couple guys that are now getting a little bit older. Andrew Kristofic in his 5th year. You're talking about Rocco Spindler, who's now going to be a 3rd-year player. If Charles Jagasaw comes in, I think, man, he just. Again, this is from me just seeing him in person once, Brian, where I saw him in person. I'm just like, holy snot, man. Like, I looked at him and I'm like, dude looks really good for 300 pounds. And then he told me he's 325 pounds. Yeah. I'm like, oh, Lord, yeah. What do you eat, man? That's insane. So he's a guy. I'll say another one that I think can have an impact, Brian, but again, not Benjamin Morrison impact, but we've talked about this one before. This was not a huge shock, but with what the tight end depth is right now with the injuries, I wouldn't be shocked if Cooper Flanagan plays some football this year.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked at all in some capacity. So
don't see him having sort of like that.
Yeah.
Don't see him having like that Benjamin Morrison deal, but yeah, he could play. Here's a follow-up question to the previous conversation that we had and this is from Hunter Land, Ryan. I'm going to ask this because you mentioned one of those plays. So I'll ask you. Yep. Hunter Land asks, in 2015, which would you rather change, the 2-point conversion or Malik Zaire getting hurt? I know which one I would pick.
I would still pick the 2-point conversion, Hunter, for me, just because I think that Malik would have ended up being a really good player after that, most likely. But I just think there's a lot more volatility with that projection because you're talking about a lot more game sample size, right? A lot more just that would have to go into that in the 2-point conversion scenario. That's one play decider. Like that's it. True. That's game, right? So I just feel like that one's a little more absolute. The Malik one I feel like has a little bit more volatility to it. So I wouldn't pick that one.
Here's why I would pick the Malik one, and it's a no-brainer for me. Because I don't necessarily agree with the volatility part. I think that Malik was not a guy that was going to go out and complete 70% of his passes every game. He was not going to be the Texas guy very often. We were going to get a lot more of the Virginia performances from Malik. A lot of people look at that as a bad thing. I don't. Because you know what he did in that game? Made a ton of plays. And the other thing is Malik was a great leader. And I've always said this, the conditions of that Clemson game were such that if Malik was your quarterback, it doesn't come down to a 2-point conversion. You just win that game. I mean, that's just the way that I look at it. And so I don't think they would have. I think they would have beat Clemson. I think they would have run the table. I really do. I think that team was so loaded, and Malik was that perfect leader, grinder type of guy, but could also throw the ball a freaking mile. You know, so you still would have got the Will Fuller deep balls because guess what? We already saw that. Do you remember the bomb he threw to Will in that Virginia game? So my dad was at that game, Ryan, and he was on. So they threw that like looking at the TV left to right. My dad was in the end zone heading in that direction. And he was he's talked to me about how like that ball just kept going and going and going and going. And I just felt like Malik, the team just, if you look at the 3 games Malik played in, LSU and Texas and Virginia, that team just responded to him. And you've seen this in football, right? Like this guy may not be the greatest quarterback ever, but when he's on the field, that team plays different. They respond to him in a different way than they do other people. And that's how I felt about Malik and that 2015 team. And we saw it in the bowl game. I just feel like if Malik could have stayed healthy that year, that team was going to be special because they had been building for him to be the guy. There was no quarterback battle in 2015. It was Malik's team. And they rallied around Malik. And the one thing about Malik is that kid was a worker when he was in college. He was a worker and he was a leader. And the kids responded to him. He was not a guy that was afraid to say, hey, get in your face in the weight room and say, hey, you're not giving me enough to anybody. And you needed that kind of guy. And so that's a good one for 2015, Hunter. If I could take Malik not get hurt, and that's the one play that I change, and then you got to tell me too that he's not going to get hurt in another play.
Right. That's
what
I mean by the volatility, right? It's like you never know what's going to happen after that.
Correct. But yeah, that would be the one for me. But I get the one, Ryan. You're talking about this is what we know. We know if you get that, right.
Yeah.
Right. But that would have just tied the game.
Sure.
They still would have had to go win it in overtime. But yeah, that.
Oh man, you were riding all the momentum though. At
all
that
of
point.
it.
You're gonna win. You're gonna.
They had shut their offense down early in the third quarter. You can't just ramp that back up, man. I don't think.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame had found some answers.
Yes, we did.
They had found some answers, and they were starting to move the ball on that Clemson defense at that point in time too. So, yeah, that's a really good one. Really good one there. I like that. Let's see here, Ryan. We got here's an interesting one, kind of relevant to today's news.
Yeah, John A. once said Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo was listed at 188 pounds by Rivals on his recruiting profile. He's the only recruit I remember not outgrowing the Rover position. Does the staff need to adjust its projection profile for Rover? I think there was a second part.
In recruiting. Yeah. No, I don't think. I don't think other guys necessarily outgrew it. I think the only guy that outgrew it to me is that they saw as being a full-time Rover is
Drew Tranquill.
Yeah. I mean, and he went from safety to will linebacker, right? And I mean, Jack Kaiser didn't outgrow it, and I don't think Nolan Ziegler's outgrown it either. I just think he's just too much of a potential impact player inside. Jalen Tita hasn't outgrown it. Jaden Osbury, I don't think will outgrow it. I think it's just more about what I think it has more to do with, John, is the Rover position is it's not obsolete. That I was going to say obsolete, but that's not what I meant. It's becoming a position that's going to be harder and harder and harder to have as a guy that plays with the number of snaps that Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo played, unless he's a Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo type of player. And a guy that can cover and do the things that he did. So, and I think that's the interesting thing about a guy like Teddy Rezak. It's something that I think is a little bit interesting about Jaden Osbury is they can be 4-down player. Jaden Osbury can be a 4-down, I say 3-down player at Rover, in my opinion, at the next level. But there's going to be some teams where it just doesn't make sense to have him be a 3-down player there. Right. He can do it, but you really are going to be better off getting a nickel into that position.
Yep.
And so I think that has more to do with it than anything. I think it's more about how many Rovers do you actually need is more of the debate now for me, as opposed to the type, because I think the type has been pretty consistent. I mean, again, Drew Tranquill wasn't recruited to be a Rover, and Nolan Ziegler was never recruited to only be a Rover. It was always play Rover, but there's always the potential that he was going to move inside.
Yeah.
And so I think it depends on the player. And I think that it's smart to have different types there, in my opinion. Yes. You don't have 3 guys can only play in space and they can't move inside, because then you can't play all 3 of those guys, especially nowadays, Ryan, where you're not going to be playing that Rover for 60, 70 snaps a game.
That's it. I mean, yeah, I think that I talked about this in the Rezak section of this podcast is diversity, John. Like, I think that's the biggest thing for me, is that I would love the ability for a guy to play in all situations, right? Like, wouldn't it be fantastic if a Rover could just playing against heavy personnel, he could reduce down, play Sam linebacker, in regular base, he can just be that 4-2-5 Rover type. In a spread out formation where a team goes no huddle and is just in an empty, if a guy can just sit there and just play nickel, like that'd be fantastic if that guy was all in the same body. But it's hard to have that, like those are really rare football players in that instance. So I'm a big fan, to Brian's point, and I made the point earlier, diversity. Right now, you have a guy like a Jalen Sneed, who's a 6'1", 216 pounds, rocked up dude, right? Who's probably going to be over 220 pounds and maybe moves inside eventually. That's kind of what I see with him. Then you have Jaden Osbury, who's more of the 6 foot, 210 pound guy, who is more of that true Rover type right now than what I think Jalen Sneed is currently. But then you're going to add Teddy Rezak, who is 6'3.5", maybe 6'4" at that point, and 205 pounds during the early portion of his career. So it's all different types of skill sets. And depending upon what team you're playing, because that's another big sell to me, is that if I'm a defensive staff selling the Rover position to a recruit, I can say, hey, when we're going to get Stanford, this is the type of Rover that we need for that game. When we're going against Clemson, this is the type of Rover that we need in this game. When we're going against X team, this is the type of Rover. We're going against Navy. Here's what our Rover is going to look like in that situation. And that also allows for you to get more players on the football field and almost become departmentalized in their role. I mean, you think about all the great inside linebackers that were dynamite against Navy, but not really against anybody else, right? Like those types of guys that get that start. Think about Joe Schmidt early in his career, right? Where it's like that guy was just a Navy specialist at the early stages of his career. That allows guys to get into a role and feel like they are a part of the game plan. They're a part of the initiative of what the defensive staff wants to do. So I think the diversity is the biggest thing for me, and it always will be. Next question from Domer Grizz says, how will wide receiver scout team work this year? If all three early enrollees are expected to impact games, will they rotate down to scouts or just use Caleb Smith and walk-ons? Will CS
Coach Stuckey, I think.
Coach Stuckey contribute or on scout?
Oh, CS. Hold on a second. No, that's not.
Oh, Caleb. I think he's saying Caleb Smith, but with a C. It's a K, just so that we're
okay
there.
Yeah.
Will Caleb Smith contribute or scout only? There we go.
I mean, I would imagine early on he's probably going to be a scout guy. There's a couple things about this, Ryan, that this is a very interesting question, and I like the question. So number one is I don't think all three of those receivers will be playing in the rotation every week.
Yes,
you know, you're gonna find some opportunities for me, in my opinion. You're gonna find opportunities to get Braylon James down on the scout team. You're gonna need to, and I think it's good for Braylon James to do that. There may even be some weeks where it's like, hey, Rico. Or Jaden Greathouse, unless you're starting, hey, on Tuesday, we need you guys down on scout team. Or it may be like, hey, we're going to send you down on scout team on Thursday during 7-on-7 because we really need you to give those guys a look. And so you'll see some of that. And I know I've been on teams that have done that. I know that they've done that in the past at different places, Ryan. I think it's smart to do that because you let them know, look, we are giving this team we're giving our scout team a look. You're still going to play. And so you may send him on Tuesday, but then you bring him up with you on Wednesday and Thursday and get him ready for the game. And he's still on all your meetings and stuff, but you just on that Tuesday, or maybe it's Wednesday, or maybe it's 7-on-7 on Thursday, something where you're going to say, hey, look, can we get these couple young guys for this practice? We're playing Ohio State on Saturday, right? Like we need to face Jeremiah Love and Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores for at least one of the practices, right? Because we need to face that speed. And you do that. You don't need to do that against Tennessee State. And so it's a week by week thing where your offensive and defensive coaches have to get together and say, do you really need that guy down there to be your sixth receiver every single day in practice? Can't we get that kid for a period or two? You know, you can do things to get him ready to play, but he's taking 10 reps with you on the first and second team because he's their number 6 receiver. He's going to get 1,000,000 reps with us, and he's going to make us better and help us go compete against, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and those guys this week.
Right.
So you have those conversations. The other thing, too, is Notre Dame's got some young walk-on receivers that are really good football players. Have you ever seen Leo Scheidler's high school film?
I have not.
That kid's a really good football player. He wanted to come to Notre Dame.
I've seen Jordan Faisons, though, that is going to be here in the summer as well. So
they had an early enrollee walk-on this year. Notre Dame did. Alex Whitman.
Oh.
He's a good football player. He's like a $150. I mean, that kid is skinny.
Yeah.
But he's a good football player. But Leo Scheidler, when I looked at him, I'm like, dude, if I'm at like Indiana State, that's a dude for me. Like that's a guy that I want to come play for me.
Yeah.
He's a good football player. He's athletic and he's got some really good film. And I remember I actually tweeted about this when he committed to Notre Dame. I was like, this guy's a good football player. It's just his brother goes to Notre Dame, his family, it's a Notre Dame family. You know what I mean? So that's why he's at Notre Dame. That guy's a good football player. He's going to give you a look.
Yeah.
And there's guys like that on the roster that you look and say, guys, I know that this is a walk-on, but this guy is a good football player that's going to make your team better. But there are just going to be some weeks where, guys, I need Braylon and Jeremiah Love down here this week because I can't replicate the speed in practice. You know what I mean? And as an offensive staff, you have to be willing to do that on certain weeks. Don't come to me and make that request the week of Tennessee State. Don't come to me and make that request when we're going to play Central Michigan. You want to make that request for NC State or Ohio State or USC, cool. Or Duke. I watched Duke's. Thank you, sweetie. I watched Duke's spring game the other day, Ryan. They got some athletes at receiver. They got Jalen Catalon. They got the Moore kid that played quarterback, battled last year with Riley Leonard for quarterback and got beat out, moved over receiver, caught like 50-some balls. I mean, they got some good athletes at receiver. That's a week where with a mobile quarterback, you may say, hey, guys, can we please get Kenny Minchie this week? I know he's up with you guys, but can we get him on Tuesday this week, please? You know, he's your number 3 quarterback. We need a guy that can sling the rock around. We're getting ready to play Louisville. You know what I mean? They're going to throw the ball a million times. I need Kenny down here with us. You know, it just, you got to be smart about it, right? Because I can't send you Jaden Greathouse every week because I need him because he's my, you know, my number 2 Z or whatever, my number 2 F or my, you know what I mean? Like I can't give you Rico Flores very often because he's my number 2. He's my number 2 Z. Which did you notice that, Ryan, in the depth chart that I put out? Yeah. They've changed the positions. It's now X is now the boundary. Z
which is the way God intended it. So thank you.
Notre Dame's the only time I ever knew called it a W. I always called it an X.
Yes.
Z. It's traditional. Z and X are now the traditional outside positions, and an F is the slot role, which can be a receiver or a tight end. Nice. By the way, so I was able to get some clarification on that. So.
Thank you, Notre Dame.
Yes.
I don't have to change my growing up of knowing football anymore. Thank you so much. It's always X and Z, man.
Yeah.
Always X and Z.
But if you can get a guy like Caleb Smith down there every week with Leo Scheidler, you know, with some of those guys you have down there, you're getting some good looks. You're going to have Cooper Flanagan potentially down there a lot this year. Yep. You know, you might have Jabron Payne down there at weeks. Some weeks you may have Jadarian Bryce down there. Some weeks you may have Jeremiah Love down there. You know, Sam Asaf is a good football player. You saw in the blue gold game. The guy's a good football player. He's a Notre Dame kid, right? I mean, his brother went here. He's had other family members go here. You know, that's the whole thing. You all have to understand these walk-ons are not just, you know, rich kids who have a dream of putting a Notre Dame uniform on and their dads donated a lot of money and they let them throw the uniforms on. That's not how this works. These are really good football players at high school level that understand, hey, I'm not an NFL player. I could go to Indiana State or Valpo or Duquesne or something and play football for 4 years, but I'm not an NFL football player. I want to be a CEO. I want to be a doctor. I want to be this. I want to be that. And Notre Dame's going to get me there. And while I'm there, I'm going to go play football.
Yes.
Right. But they're good football. There's a lot of those kids on this football team, Ryan, that are good. I mean, we talked about the incoming recruiting class. Say, well, man, you know, you're a little short on numbers at safety or whatever, or linebacker. And you're going to have to get a walk-on down there playing linebacker and this kid named Luke Talich. And like, dude, guys, Luke Talich is going to be better than some guys they face on Saturdays this year. Let's be real about that athletically.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think anyone's going to tell any of the running backs that Luke Talich is a walk-on when he's beating them in the hole. Like,
I think Henry Garrity's like that. I mean, if you've got Henry Garrity and Cooper Flanagan down there running tight end for you this year, you're good. You're good. And they have like 37 tight ends on the roster, man. I mean, they have so many walk-on tight ends. It's not even funny.
And everybody.
Yeah, but you'll have some guys that can give you looks. There's no doubt about it. There's no
Jordan
doubt.
Faison playing a little slot, maybe playing some quarterback in Navy week.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an athletic football player that can help your football. I mean, he's going to give you a good look. There's no doubt. Yep. The position where I'm most concerned about that, Ryan, is quarterback. It's going to be tough to have one of those two guys, Minchie or Angeli, down there very often.
Yeah. Well, look, I haven't seen the Dylan DeVezin kid play, but hopefully he can give him a decent look. I know he
can spin it. Yeah. But he's, not very big and he's not Kenny Minchie or Steve Angeli's a prospect.
Sure.
But there's going to be weeks you're going to have to say, hey guys, we need to do more good on good, which is another thing you can do, right? One-on-ones this week are good on good. I need Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart going against Tobias and Dion and Jaden and those guys this week in one-on-ones, right? Okay, cool. Some weeks like, hey guys, I don't need to take a chance of getting these guys hurt. We're playing Tennessee State.
Yes.
We don't. That's just part of being smart as a coach and saying, when you do and don't need that. So yeah, it's a very, very good question. Very good question.
Next question is from Christopher Crosby. Thank you for the question. It says, we talked a little bit about Andrew Voorhees and how people were saying he could have been a first or second pick if not for the injury. I had a 5th round grade on him. Is that a fair ranking? Yeah, Christopher, I think it's a fair ranking. I think it is. Look, I said this on Twitter when all the madness of the Andrew Voorhees hype was happening. I was like, that's a solid day 3 football player, Andrew Voorhees. Like, that's what he is. I think that Andrew Voorhees, barring an injury setback, will make a roster in 2023. And I think he'll be a sound backup option at both interior spots. And he even played a little bit of offensive tackle during his USC career. So backup in a pinch at tackle when you need it, right? Like I think he's a good swing player. And when you're talking about a 5th round grade, at least for me, a 5th round grade is that depth piece as an offensive lineman, a guy that can potentially swing in a couple of different spots. So for me, if Andrew Voorhees didn't get hurt, probably would have been a 5th round pick. Probably is where he would have went, 4th or 5th round. Somewhere
in some team, yeah, right. Some team might have fallen in love with him in round 4, right? Like that's what happened with Robert Hainsey, right? Like Robert Hainsey was getting mostly like round 4 grades, but a couple teams, I was told the Eagles and the Bucks were 2 teams that had fallen in love with him that were probably going to take him in round 3.
Yes,
and obviously the Bucks took him. Yep. But it just takes one. But yeah, it's a good response, good answer, Ryan. I'm gonna read this next one. We have a super chat here from ICURN with Irish Luck, and he says, Ryan, I've missed live shows, but I hope everything is great with your family, man. I am sending prayers your way, brother. And you had a lot of people, obviously, Ryan, when you had to leave the show praying for you. So if you don't, are you okay? I know you did on the board. Are you okay? Just giving an update of kind of what happened and where things are now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so basically we were doing the live show and I really do want to just say that I appreciate everyone so much because I had Twitter messages, I had message board messages, I had a message board post, I had people texting me. I just want to, so that day I basically had gotten a text from my wife that said, call me. And my wife never does that during shows. Like she never just says like, call me, like dire. So I talked to her and basically she had gone in for a checkup because for people that don't know, I'm expecting a baby here in just a couple weeks. My second
daughter. Little girl, right?
Yeah. Yep. Second daughter. And basically when they went in to hear the heartbeat and everything, they heard the heartbeat, but then the heartbeat went down drastically. And they're like and basically my wife was freaking out because the nurse that was doing or the procedure was just kind of like, you need to go to the emergency room right now. And like didn't explain anything to her. It was like, this is serious. Like you need to go to the emergency room. So we ended up having to go to the emergency room. My wife had to be on the ultrasound thing or whatever that thing's called for like 2 hours or whatever, just to monitor and stuff. So luckily everything seems fine. No setbacks in that regard. They were able to find the heartbeat consistently and everything seems okay now. So everything's good. Expecting the baby. I was telling Brian this yesterday. I think that this baby is going to come a bit earlier than anticipated. That's what it feels like now.
Bracing myself. Yeah.
Yes. But I appreciate everyone truly for the good wishes and the prayers and everything. It was a scary couple hours, but we're all good. We're all expecting the same thing. And we seem to be out of the woods, hopefully. So we're good. Thank you all.
So Ryan, I have to have a talk with Caitlin, see if she can hold on a little bit. I'm not ready for you to be gone just yet for a couple weeks, but we'll get her figured out. But yeah, all right, ICRN, man, we really appreciate that support that you showed.
No doubt.
You have another super chat here from Ryan or from Tyler Evans.
Great name though, Ryan is. Is there a blue blood program that will never get back to the power it was? That's an interesting question.
Ryan is like the TO of Irish Breakdown. I love me some me.
I didn't say that, man. I didn't say that. You just had Ryan on the brain. Is there a blue blood program that will never get back to the power it was? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan, because there's a lot of discussion in the board about Nebraska.
Though that's the one that I was going to go to. Honestly, I didn't even see that discussion happen. Yeah,
I would have an asterisk by Nebraska. Okay. They will never get back to being a power like they were as long as they stay in the Big Ten. If they go back to the Big 12, I think they could, because I think it completely changed. Being in the Big Ten completely changed their recruiting dynamic. Kids in Texas, if kids are from Texas want to go play in the Big Ten, they're going to go to Ohio State or Michigan if they're that kind of guy. And I think it really hurt their recruiting dynamic, in my opinion. It really did. And look, Nebraska's never been a very big state. It's never been a very populated state. It still has a lot of the kids that they've had. But look, here's the deal. A lot of the kids from Nebraska are leaving the state. They're not staying in Nebraska. That used to never happen. Xavier Watts 30 years ago might not come to Notre Dame. He probably stays in Nebraska. Teddy Rezak gets offered by Notre Dame 30 years ago, and he's ready to commit to Notre Dame. And then Nebraska offers. It's like, sorry, Notre Dame, I'm going to Nebraska now. That's just kind of how it was. They haven't done a good job of keeping their in-state talent home, and then there's not a lot of it, but that's what it's like. Indiana, Notre Dame doesn't get a lot of in-state, big time town Indiana, but when they get them, you got to get those guys.
Yes,
and there's a lot of states around Nebraska that I think you can recruit from that have some talent, right? And and that they would recruit from. But here's the other thing too is like, where a lot of Nebraska's players came from was far away. I mean, where was Tommy Frazier from? Wasn't he from Florida? I mean, he's a Florida guy. Nebraska used to make a killing going down to Florida and getting guys. I think the only demographic change that's hurt Nebraska is the change in the JUCO level. Because like now JUCO's for like that guy that didn't qualify or the guy that got kicked off of a team. We think of like Last Chance U. Didn't used to be like that. JUCOs used to be really good football because you'd have all these kids that just got overlooked by programs and went to JUCO they didn't get the scholarship offers they wanted, or they didn't get any offers, and they would go. And some of them were guys that had grades and all that, but it wasn't exclusively that. Nebraska would make a killing at the JUCO level as well, getting some of those guys. Some of them were troublemakers and some of them were not. And that's the other thing too is Tom Osborne brought a lot of, let's say, questionable characters into his program, but he was able to keep them in line for the most part enough. Obviously, Lawrence Phillips had his issues, but he was able to keep them in line enough to where, they could go out and play as a team and dominate. But, I mean, they would go to Texas and get guys. They'd go out to California and get guys. They'd go to Florida and get guys because they were a national brand. If they were in a different league, in my opinion, if they went back to the Big 12 and had the right coach, and I think Matt Rule can be that guy, I do think they can be a national power again. I do. Because the thing is, there's money in that program. There's a lot of people willing to spend money in the Nebraska program that if they need to go get some guys, they'll go get some guys. Believe me, they have landed – the boosters in Nebraska have landed plenty of big-time players over the years, my friend. Believe me. You know what I mean? So I think they could. I just don't think they can in the Big Ten. That's my only problem. I think that's one for me, Ryan.
Does Navy count as a blue blood? Because if they do, then that's
no. I mean, I don't think they're blue bloods. I mean, they had their stretches back in the 40s, but like, to me, it's like teams that maybe in the last 30, 40 years have been. And to me, like, I don't consider like Colorado a blue blood. They had a stretch there for a few years, but they're not a traditional power, in my opinion. There aren't a lot that I don't think can get back to being good. It's just they're not going to get back to being good in their current situations. UCLA is one. Going to the Big Ten killed UCLA's ability to get back to being a big-time program, in my opinion.
Miami's inability to have the structure and support behind them. Like,
right. But hire the right president who hires the right AD, and that's fixed in 2 years.
Sure.
That's the thing is like, so it's they won't ever, it's like Notre Dame. There's been stretches where Notre Dame had no chance of getting back to being a blue blood because of the leadership at the school. But it wasn't that they were incapable of it as an institution. And so I think that there's just, to me, I'm trying to, like Pitt's one that's going to have a hard time ever being there. Because I do think Pitt was a blue blood. They had about a 20-year period where they had some dominant teams. I mean, you obviously won a title with 70s and 80s because you had like Tony Dorsett in the 70s, and then you had those 80s teams that were really good. So, I mean, I think you could maybe call them a blue blood. Some people would argue that they're not a blue blood, but they're a team that to me will never get back to being the program that they were in the 70s or 80s for a million reasons. There's not the support anymore. The state just doesn't produce the amount of talent that it used to. Pitt's got 9 claimed national titles and 8 unclaimed national titles.
Ooh.
So they have a history of college of success in football, and they claimed one in 76. They have unclaimed in 80 and 81. Unclaimed basically means that one of the outlets gave them a national title, but it wasn't one of the recognized outlets that count as the claimed ones.
Sure.
But, you have some legendary players coming out of Pitt in that 20-year stretch. I mean, Dorsett, Bill Fralick, Hugh Green, Dan Marino. I mean, Jimbo, the guy that was Jimbo Covert was from Pitt too, right?
Covert,
So you had some big-time players. Ricardo McDonald, who was the brother of Devin McDonald, played Notre Dame. That's a team that I thought, but I don't see Pitt. Don't have their own stadium. It's a hard place to recruit to now to that level. You don't have the institutional support, and I just don't think the talent base is good enough for them to, because they're not a national program like Penn State is, in my opinion, or Penn State can be, in my opinion. But that would be another one, Ryan, that I look at. I'm trying to think of some others, but
I still hate how some of these teams are in these conferences now, which don't make any sense. Like Nebraska in the Big Ten and Maryland in the Big Ten. I'm like, why is Maryland in the Big Ten? But
right,
sure,
exactly.
Sure.
Oh, it's because of money. right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
Sure, I know why, but like
Yeah.
geographically, it just fit. It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense, but yeah.
I don't know if I would count this team as a blue blood, Ryan, because I don't know if they ever were quite good enough to be considered a blue blood, and they only have one national title. But like, I don't see Syracuse being the team that they were during periods of their career as well. Where they were a pretty good team, but I wouldn't call them I wouldn't call them a blue blood. But I think they're a team that's going to have a tough time being kind of what they were, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Where they had some pretty good
Jim
pretty good
Brown,
eras.
Floyd Little,
Yeah.
Ernie Davis, all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. They had one of the best names ever for a coach. They had a coach that was there from 1949 to 1973, and I'm not pulling this off the top of my head. I'm reading this because I remember the name, but
I know this, right? Isn't it
Ben Schwartzwalder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
I always want to call him Buck Showalter because for obvious reasons. So
looking through it, Ryan. I mean, who else would you consider a blue blood that Virginia's not a blue blood. Virginia Tech wasn't a blue blood. Texas can get back there. Oklahoma can get back there. I mean, West Virginia's not a blue blood. They just had a couple teams here and there. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State can get there.
Yep.
Michigan State could get there with the right coach and the right situation. Not that I'd call them a blue blood, but they used to be a pretty good program. They can get back there. Iowa is still what they've always been. I mean,
I don't think
what they are now is what they were under Hayden Fry for 40 years. It's a good team that, was not really a team that's going to – I mean, they got one title in their careers in like 1958, so like they're more Syracuse in that regard, but they were a really good football team for a long period of time, and I feel like that's exactly what they are now.
Yeah.
And I think that if you hire the right coach – now, here's the thing. A place like that, Ryan, it's a place where you need to have the right coach in place.
Yes.
Some schools can win no matter who you – I mean, you're going to have some level of success basically no matter who you are. You don't need – as long as the guy's not a bum, you're going to be a good football team. But USC made a lot of bowl games with very mediocre to bad head coaches and still had the talent to go to bowl games consistently, right? You just need the really good coach to win titles. A place like Iowa needs a really good coach just to go 8 wins every year consistently.
Yes.
So
I was going to say, if they follow up Kirk Ferentz with like not a great coach, that team could go into dumpster pretty quick. I mean, honestly.
Agree. But they'd be able to come out of it if they then 5-6 years after that fact bring in a good head coach. Kansas State's a perfect example, right? Bill Snyder's there. They're good. He leaves. Really good, Ron Prince runs it into the ground. Bring Bill Snyder back. Guess what? They're good again. And I think Chris Kleiman is doing a good job there too. Miami and Florida State can get back there. I have no doubt, especially Florida State. There's no doubt those programs can get back to that. No question. Some people consider Washington a blue blood. They can get back to that. Look what
they're going in the right direction.
What the guy did last year in 1 year. I think a team that really I'm concerned for and worried about is UCLA going to the Big Ten. That would concern me if I'm a UCLA person. It would really concern me. Now, their team right now might be built for that, but in a couple years, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
I'll tell you my pick. North Dakota State. I think it's over, man. I think the reign is over.
You being sarcastic or are you being serious?
Not fully, honestly. This past team was one of the worst teams they've had in a couple of years, and South Dakota State finally overtook them. So I feel like they could hit a little bit of a downtrot. But like downtrot is in they're not the absolute best program on the FCS level. It's more parity.
My question would be, though, is that will never get back to the power it was. I think you could say that about North Dakota State because if they win 3 titles in every 6 years, that's not the way that they used to be.
Yes.
If you're getting technical, didn't they win like 6 in a row at one point in time or something insane like that? Like Mount Union will win titles again. Mount Union will win more national championships. They're never going to be what they were under Larry Karras ever.
Yes.
So if you want to go to the lower levels, that's one. Where Mount Union will never. Yeah,
Nathan Milton's trying to throw shade on New Jersey, man. I've seen him say Rutgers in the chat like 6 times, man.
Yeah,
leave Rutgers alone.
They didn't win 6. They didn't win 6 in a row, Ryan. I apologize. They won 6 out of 7 years, and they won 8 in 11 years.
Still decent.
It's nuts. And in that 6 out of 7, they lost 1 game in 7 years. They lost the Division III national semifinal game in 1999. Let me find this one here real quick. That's insane. I'm trying to. So 1999 Mount Union team. They let me find the playoff that year. See who beat them. Rowan beat them that year. Ryan, there you go.
Ooh.
That was the year that Rowan lost to Pacific Lutheran in the national championship. I actually remember that. Remember Pac Lutheran had that big old running back on that team. Do you remember that guy? He was a transfer from a bigger school, I think.
I do not.
But Rowan beat Mount Union by a touchdown that year. But in that 7-year stretch,
props, man. Props.
Other than that semifinal loss to Rowan in 7 years, they lost no games. That's the only game they lost in 7 years. Was that one right there? That's nuts.
Yes.
Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. All right, let's get to some more questions. That was a good one, Tyler. I like those. Those are great questions for a day like today, Ryan. No doubt.
Yes.
I love those on the Friday free for all. I was going to say open line Friday again. I always mess that up.
Open line
Friday free for all. Yeah, open line Friday. It's a show I used to listen to as a kid.
We're getting the line on, man. We're gonna let people call in. Let's do it.
And that's where it came from. Because there was a show I listened to when I for a long time. They had every Friday. It's called Open Line Friday. That's where the idea came from for the free for all mailbag. But I keep wanting to call it that. It's not that. Right,
next question is from John A1, who said, if there were a 14 playoff in 2003, John, you're making me do research now, man. Who would have came away with the title? LSU, Oklahoma, USC, or Michigan, top 4 going into bowl season?
So I think I'm trying to remember. That was the year that LSU beat Oklahoma for the title, correct?
So
but it's
Matt
also
Flynn?
a year. I always get these two confused. Matt Flynn wasn't he the quarterback on the 07 team?
Yeah, that makes sense.
This I think was the Matt Mock team.
Matt Mock. Yeah, okay. Yep.
I could be wrong on that.
No, I think you're right on that.
This was the Matt Mock team, I believe. And then Matt Flynn was the quarterback, I think, on the later team that won it. But that year, because the way it worked is LSU was crowned the champ, right, by the coaches poll and the BCS essentially. But the AP named USC number 1. And if you remember that year, because I'll do the research for you, Ryan. If you remember that year, Oklahoma played LSU in the national title game. Oklahoma got beat 35-7 in the Big 12 title game by Kansas State, and still was the number 2 seed in the college football playoff.
And that was Jason White, Oklahoma, right? That was
correct.
Jason White, Oklahoma?
Correct. Yeah. And USC that year went. They also only had 1 loss, but they lost to Cal in September in 3 overtimes. And they didn't get in. They beat number 6 Auburn early in the year. They beat Washington State, but they didn't play like a lot of great teams that year. And I didn't think Oklahoma did either. But I still don't. It was a joke that Oklahoma got in that game. Absolute joke. And if there was a college football playoff, that 03 USC team beats all of them. When that team finally hit their stride, they weren't just winning games. They killed everyone they played. So after the Cal game. Matter of fact, the Cal game was the only anomaly they had. The Cal game was the only game that wasn't decided by single digits. They beat Auburn on the road 23-0, beat BYU 35-18. That was a not a very good BYU team. Beat Hawaii 61-32, lost to Cal on the road. Then went on the road to beat Arizona State 37-17. Then they went and beat Stanford 44-21. They beat Notre Dame that year 45-14.
Yuck.
They beat Washington that year 43-23. I'm trying. Hold on one second. I'm seeing what Washington was a 6-16 that year. Washington State that year finished number 9 in the country, and they beat that Washington State team 43-16. Beat Arizona 45-0. Beat UCLA 47-22, and beat Oregon State 52-28. That's what that team did that year. But a lot of teams they played weren't that good, but they destroyed those teams.
That was the first year with Matt Leinart as the starter.
No,
right?
that was
Carson Palmer.
You know what? No, that was a Matt Leinart team. You are correct. Carson Palmer was the 02
year
team.
after, right?
You were correct. Yeah. You were correct because the Carson Palmer's last game was when they played Iowa in the was it the Orange Bowl? They played Iowa. Yeah. I forget.
With Drew Tate led Iowa. I think, right? I believe.
Yes. Yeah. And then they played Michigan that year in the final four. So if you're looking at it, to your point, John, the AP had USC ranked number 1 going into the playoff, and they had Michigan going into the postseason. They had Michigan number 4. They had LSU number 2, and they had Oklahoma number 3. So that, say that would have been in. LSU beats Oklahoma. USC beats a really good Michigan team, Ryan, by 2 touchdowns. That was a really good Michigan team that year. Now, they did have 2 losses that year, but they were a really good Michigan team. They were a really good team, and they had just pounded. So they lost 2 games early to Oregon and Iowa, but after that, they beat number 17 Minnesota on the road. They beat Illinois. They beat number 10 Purdue 31-3. They went on the road and beat number 9 Michigan State 27-20, beat Northwestern on the road, and then at home beat number 4 Ohio State 35-21. And they also that year beat number 15 Notre Dame 38-0, and we found out Notre Dame wasn't that good that year, but they did win that game. So USC to me goes and plays LSU in the playoff and in the championship game, and they'd have beat LSU that year. They would absolutely beat LSU that year.
So that Michigan team, was that a Chad Henne or was that a John Navarre team?
That's a good question. I think that was a John Navarre team. Chad Henne, I think, took over in 2004, I believe. Yeah, that was a John Navarre team. John Navarre team. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up real quick, Ryan. Just give me a second. I want to look that up for sure. But they had Braylon Edwards, Jason Levant. Let me just look up Michigan's 2003 stats. Michigan football stats. But yeah, they had really good skill players. John Navarre, he's tall. He had
6'6".
Threw for 3,300 yards, 24 touchdowns, 10 picks. Chris Perry that year rushed for 1,600 yards. Ryan, if you remember
Chris Perry was a stud, man. He went the first round.
Yep. Braylon Edwards had 85 catches for 1,138 yards, 14 touchdowns. Jason Avant had 772 yards. Steve Breston, remember Steve Breston? Had 444 yards. Yeah, and they had Tim Massaquoi on that team. Chris Perry that year had 367 receiving yards on that team. That's not bad. That's not bad. Defensively, they had guys like Marlon Jackson. You remember him, right? He was a really good player. Sure. Ernest Chazor, Jeremy Lesueur, Marcus Curry, Leon Hall. Steve Breston was a really dynamic punt returner on that team. So that was a good football team. It was a really good football team. But they don't beat USC that year.
USC team was sick, man. Sick team.
They don't beat USC that year. That was a really, really good USC
that like 03 to 05 USC stretch was just like talented, man.
Because remember, that was Mike Williams' sophomore year. So, he was dynamic. That was Reggie Bush's first year. You had Dominic Bird.
Lendale White, right? Probably.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Lendale White was probably on that team then, right?
No, he was not. He was not really a factor for them that year. Him and Reggie really took off the next year. Their leading rushers that year. Oh, actually, no, you're right, Ryan. You're correct. Actually, Lendale had more yards that year than Reggie. You're correct. And Herschel Dennis was their number 2 rusher. Reggie had 521 rushing yards, also had 314 receiving yards, and then obviously had he was their kick returner that year as well. But yeah, Lendale, both of them as freshmen, they had 2,000-yard receivers, Mike Williams and Kerry Colbert. They also had They also had Steve Smith on that team as their slot receiver. So yeah, that was a loaded team. That was Mike Williams.
Dwayne Jarrett came in the next year, probably, right? Like just insane, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, they probably had Dominic Bird was probably their tight end then.
He was
right?
He was. Yeah.
He's a good player too.
The next year, their leading receivers, as you said, were Dwayne Jarrett and Steve Smith. So yeah, they that team was loaded. They were really, really loaded. That was a really good football team.
It's really funny.
Remember we were talking about Darnell Bing the other day? He was on that team. Right? He was on that team. Kenechi Aduze, remember him? Frosty Rucker was on that team. So yeah, they had some dudes. They had some dudes on that team.
It's crazy to think about that you had those wide receivers of Mike Williams, Dwayne Jarrett, Steve Smith, and Kerry Colbert, and all those guys. Yep. The guy that ended up being the most productive NFL player was Steve Smith. Pretty significantly, too.
Sean Cody was on that team, too, a guy that should have gone to Notre Dame if Notre Dame didn't blow it. But yeah, that's USC wins that one, bud, in my opinion.
That linebacker crew in 05, right? What was it? Cushing, Maluga, Keith Rivers. Matt
Grodegood was on those teams as well, if you remember him. That funky name he had. Yeah.
That team was sick, man.
Yeah, it really was.
And then you got Darnell Bing on the second level sometimes. Like, oh my God. All right.
Here's another interesting big picture question from actually, I'm going to go back to John's question there in a little bit. Let's get back to some Notre Dame stuff here for a little bit. But John's got a really interesting Penn State question I want to get to later. Okay. But let's go here first.
Christopher Crosby said, I've watched Isaiah Canyon's highlights film several times. I have not seen any of his game film yet. He has some good throws in there. How high of a level do you think he could play quarterback, Power 5, Division 3, etc.? I think personally, Brian, and this is just for me, I think he could be a high level quarterback on an FCS level team.
Yeah.
And I think that he could, but I think he could play quarterback on a group of 5 team and be like a dual threat
Solid
type of kid.
Yeah. Agree. I agree. He can. I mean, because like you said, he's got an arm. He's accurate. He can make reads. He's not just some athlete that can throw it a mile.
He's like a 69% completion guy last year,
Right,
man.
exactly.
Like legitimately, like it's like he's like
he wasn't like
just
he wasn't
chucking.
running the triple option, going 14 of 35, but he had some bombs. I mean, he was completing a high percentage of his passes.
I mean for comparison, he legitimately can throw the football. Oliver Miles is a kid where it's just like he's just in there because he can run the ball. Like he's not a passer, right? Like Oliver Miles, I think completed like 50% of his passes last year, had the same amount of touchdowns and interceptions. Like Isaiah Canyon was a legit thrower for Warner Robins last year.
Yeah. All right, let's go to some more here, Ryan. Here's one from Notre Dame 2164, one of our OGs.
Question is, no question today, guys. I just wanted to say how thankful I am to be a part of this community and how proud I am of this channel and how far it's come. Also, don't let negativity bring you down.
I appreciate you very, very much. Appreciate you very much. Here's one, Ryan, I'm going to read for you. Okay. This is from Cameron Crazy 818. Ryan, he asks, what's the best cheesesteak in Philly? Pat's, Geno's, or Tony Luke's? Is Lilo's still the best?
I prefer Lilo's, Cameron. I do. It's not a best cheesesteak in Philly because Lilo's is in South Jersey, right? So like it doesn't fit the criteria in that regard. But if you ask me, I can go into Philly and get one of a Pat's, a Geno's, or a Tony Luke's, or I can just stay in Jersey and get a Lilo's down the road. Going to Lilo's, brother. Lilo, I think it's just a more high quality product. You know, like it's some of those chains at times you'll get some steak or cheese whiz or whatever, where you're just like, this isn't incredibly high quality stuff because you're just mass producing it. Lilo's is like, they're getting you legitimate steak. They're not just drowning it in subpar cheese. They're putting legitimate provolone or American or whatever cheese you want on there. They're toasting the roll for every single order. Like they take care of you, man. So Lilo's number one. Out of those three, I would probably go Pat's. Out of Pat's, Geno, I would probably go in that order. Actually, I'd probably go Pat's, Geno's, then Tony Luke's for me. Tony Luke's is just a little quality's gone down over the years, but yes, Lilo's for me, man. Go check it out. It's good.
You have to give me a second, Ryan. I'm actually ordering lunch now because I just got hungry all of a sudden. So for some strange
Brian,
reason,
Lilo's put some garlic butter on the rolls, man. Toast it up.
I'm gonna have to mute Ryan. I'm gonna have to leave the show and go get lunch here after that conversation. All right, let's go here, Ryan. I'll get this one a little bit one.
Charles Parsons says, in your opinion, who are the most important June visitors? Also, is Notre Dame still on Bronte Johnson? Saw he was a crystal ball to Notre Dame.
I don't see that one happening, Ryan. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about that. That's obviously somebody's crystal ball that they will eventually change. I don't know who still has him.
That's why it's so flawed, is the fact that you can change it so easily.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
And you can leave it on a kid for so long, even though you know he's not going there. There's one prediction on him, and that was made. That was made by Tom Lloyd back in January. But back in January, there was a lot more optimism that they were going to be able to get him into school and do all that kind of stuff. So it made sense for Tom to put the crystal ball out. But here's what's going to happen: Tom will change it at some point in time, and and you get credit for it being right. Although I give Tom credit, he doesn't always change his crystal balls. He won't just at the last second always change a crystal ball right before it happens to get his percentages up, which is why his percentage is a lot lower than some of the national guys who will make 3 or 4 different crystal balls for a guy. And then, because like Ryan, when was the last time a kid committed and we're like, wow, I had no clue that was going to happen? At least a couple days in advance. I mean, it rarely happens. And so, we'd be able to change our crystal balls.
Davion Dixon, I guess, was a quick one, but like otherwise,
but he wouldn't have been a kid that we'd have had a crystal ball in for, right? That's, what I mean? Like, so, I mean, that's why I don't put a lot of stock in that stuff. To me, you should be able to do a crystal ball once. That's it. You can do one crystal ball and you can't change it. And then let's see what your percentage is. First of all, let's see how often they use it for clickbait like they do. And then let's see what your percentage is. So, Notre Dame could have signed 75 kids last year if they would have got every kid to get a crystal ball.
That's
for
very
them.
true, man. That's very true. Yeah. I mean, I think there's still a crystal ball out there for CJ Carter, Michigan somewhere. So, yeah.
Very well played, my friend.
Well, my favorite one was that Brendan Vernon still crystal balled somewhere to Ohio State, and he was never going to go to Ohio State.
Because I think it's once a guy commits, it's locked in. You can't change it once a guy commits, so you can't take those away. Yeah, that's funny. That's very funny. Here we go.
From Rob Osgood, who said, "From my son Jack, does the Notre Dame Leprechaun have a name?" I had no idea.
So I was doing some research on this when I saw the question come up, Rob, and the Leprechaun does not have a name. It's just the Leprechaun. The only nicknames they've had are they used to have a dog as part of their mascot, and it was Clashmore Mike was the last name that was given to it. So, but it was I think I read here, it was a terrier. Let's see here. Yeah, see, a number of
Irish
terriers
Terrier.
later took the role of the school mascot, which usually took the name Clashmore Mike.
Oh.
So, yeah. Then the Leprechaun was officially named the mascot in 1965.
I will say this, though.
But it's just called the Leprechaun is the name.
Yeah. But the person that plays the Leprechaun, Rob, definitely has a name. Guaranteed.
Sure. But the mascot.
I know. I'm just
the mascot.
Yeah. I'm just being a jerk.
Ryan, you are. You definitely are today.
That was a jerk comment.
Knock it off.
All the good
fun. All here we go. This is an interesting one.
From Patrick Quinlan, who says, hypothetical trade, Joe Alt to Ohio State in exchange for Marvin Harrison Jr. Who says no? Does this make each team better or worse? I say no. I say no.
Here's why. You could make a case that Marvin Harrison is going to be the best player in college football next year. This is not a comment about is Marvin Harrison great. It's about looking at your roster and, number one, what is your foundation? You can't say, hey, we're a team built on line play and then trade your elite left tackle for a wide receiver.
Yes.
Number two, I feel a lot better about where the receiving depth chart is now than I would for the offensive line depth chart if they traded Joe Alt away.
Who's going to be the replacement for Joe Alt?
Well, Blake Fisher slides over, but then my question is, who slides? It's like this. Emil Wagner probably steps into the starting lineup, or Tosh Baker does, right? So my question is, who do you want starting? Deion Colsey or Jaden Thomas, whoever be the boundary, or Emil Wagner with Joe Alt, or Marvin Harrison, a receiver, and Emil Wagner or Tosh Baker at tackle, with two other guards that are first-time starters, right? So it's about composition of your roster and your team. Now, if we were in a situation where, let's say, Notre Dame would have landed Monroe Freeling last year, I might be Ryan or Samson Okunlola. I might be a little bit more inclined to say, well, I don't love that trade. I'd always rather have the elite left tackle, but I do have Blake Fisher, who I think would be a pretty flippin' darn good left tackle. And between Emil Wagner and now I got Samson Okunlola, I got Charles Jagasaw, I've got Monroe Freeling. I feel like we're going to be okay there. I'd consider it then. But, I don't want to have to thrust Charles Jagasaw into the starting lineup at tackle, especially since I kind of would like to see him step into the starting lineup, maybe a guard, But, I would turn that down.
I would love feedback on Ohio State's side. I know Archer's probably in here. Archer, would you take Joe Alt for Marvin Harrison Jr.? Serious question. Would you?
I would.
Ohio State could cushion it.
But here's why it might be better for Ohio State to make that trade. You've got Emeka. You've got the best freshman group receivers. Cardinal Tate had a great spring. You had a really good freshman class last year. All like 2 or 3 of those guys have already transferred. But you're loaded at receiver. Offensive line's a huge question mark for them. Huge question mark. So I think Ohio State would probably consider it more than Notre Dame would, just because again, they're replacing Marvin from a position of strength.
Right.
Where Notre Dame wouldn't be trying to replace Joe Alt from the same position of strength. The loss of Joe Alt would hurt Notre Dame more than the loss of Marvin Harrison would hurt Ohio State. Does that make sense? Right. So again, this isn't two Notre Dame guys trying to say, oh, Joe Alt's better than Marvin Harrison. That's not the point. It's about making your team, your whole group, as good as it can be. And Ohio State would be a lot better positioned over the course of an entire season to play without Marvin Harrison than Notre Dame would be to play without Joe Alt. That's the reality.
I think the separation between the San Diego State kid that just transferred to Ohio State and Joe Alt is a lot larger than Marvin Harrison Jr. going down the Cardinal Tate. That's my whole point, right? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in college football. There's no doubt. But you know who's probably going to be really, really good?
Yeah.
Cardinal Tate.
And
Brandon
was in the
Ennis.
spring.
Like,
and was already in the spring. And they got a Emeka Egbuka and all that. Yeah. And again, none of Notre Dame's receivers are as good as Marvin Harrison. I'm not saying that. But it's more, it's also about at receiver, Notre Dame would be I'm not worried about receiver, to be completely honest with you. Like Ohio State's worried about offensive line. Because I can scheme my way to success at receiver. I can't scheme my way to success with a not great left tackle. I am who I am. Not against the best teams on your schedule anyway.
I think it's where a team could best cushion the blow. And I feel like Ohio State would be able to cushion that blow more than
you can't tell me that we recruit receivers better than anybody else in college football and then say we couldn't handle losing Marvin Harrison.
Right.
You can't. And they, not that you'd want to, but if you're getting an elite left tackle as the replacement, you kind of got to feel like Ohio State would have to consider that.
Yeah.
At least I would anyway.
I would definitely reconsider it. I would.
Well, here's a recruiting question, Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and ask this one so you can answer it since it's a recruiting one. And Ian Johnson asks, does Teddy Rezak's commitment impact the recruitment of Chris Cole since he was recruited as a Rover as well?
No, Ian, it doesn't. We talked about this the other day. So Chris Cole is a much more projectable player playing inside as a will linebacker than what like Teddy Rezak is. Like Teddy is a pure Rover right now. Like that's what he is. Yes, Notre Dame has talked to him about if your body develops a certain way, if you get to a certain weight, all that type of stuff, maybe you move inside. But right now he is a pure Rover for Notre Dame. Chris Cole's a kid that, yes, can he play Rover? Sure. Can he also play will linebacker? Because me and Brian both saw him in person, right? And he is 6'3", long, already 210 pounds. He's going to be 225, but probably during his freshman year if he ends up at Notre Dame or wherever he ends up, right? So I don't think that impacts that much at all. I think that you're still looking to get two other linebackers in this class, Kingston Viliamoasa, and if you're able to get a Chris Cole to pair with the Teddy Rezak, you feel pretty good about that linebacker class overall.
Yeah, Ryan, I agree with you. Chris Cole, I feel a lot better about being able to play a lot of different positions. Yes. Rover is where we see him right now, but I've said, even before this week, I've said I think Chris Cole has a chance to grow into a will. I wouldn't even be completely shocked at all, like completely shocked, like completely stunned if someday he's a 255-pound Viper that just is
he's
just
long, man. He's
right? He's just kind of, I'm not predicting it, Ryan. He doesn't have quite the frame Josh Burnham had, but you've seen the kid in person.
Yes.
It would not be a shock if like in 2 years, all of a sudden he has like a 25-pound, 30-pound jump in size after a year in Matt Bayless' strength program. I could see that. Again, I'm not predicting it, but I could see it. I could see it for sure.
Yeah, no, he's stupid long, man. Just seeing him in person, he is stupid long. I need to ask him what his arm length was, but he's got to have 33+ inch arms too, man. He is long.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. He's a very, very, very long player. All right, this is good. That's a good question. A very fair question, though. Very, very question. I want to get to another one, Ryan. Then I'm gonna ask you about here. That's along the same lines. Michael asks, my guy Michael, know Michael long time. Appreciate you, Michael. Does the commit of Teddy Rezak help with the 2025 high school teammate? That's Christian Jones, who I also believe plays the linebacker position. You are correct. He is a kind of a will for them, but projects to me as more of a Mike at the next level. Yeah. But yes, go ahead. You want to go ahead and get that one, Ryan?
Yeah, Michael. So to Brian's point, Christian Jones is already a 6'3", 220-pound linebacker as a sophomore in high school. So he definitely, I think, projects to Mike long-term. There's no doubt. Could it help? I think so because, Brian, if you look at the one of the first quote tweets when Rezak got his offer from Notre Dame, it was Christian Jones that retweeted it and said, nobody deserves this more than him. And we know that I've spoken to Christian several times since he got offered during the Pot of Gold offer event. And he, I think, has a high interest in Notre Dame. I would be very surprised if he did not visit Notre Dame over the next couple months. I think that is definitely a thing that he will do. He's an impressive kid, man. He ran in a 11 flat as a sophomore, 100-meter dash at 6'3", 220 pounds. Also was a 50+ foot shot putter as a sophomore as well. So this kid's explosive. He's got range. He's physical. I love Christian Jones. And yes, I think that it can definitely help you maybe get a little bit of an inside track. So we'll see how, as far as if in actuality it does, but I do think that it can help you out, no doubt.
You are correct. And Ryan, I like the way you presented that, because what you're saying is this isn't going to be a thing where, he's following him to the school, but he kid already liked you. This could be one of those things that is a tiebreaker if it comes down to it, right? That's a great way of saying it.
Over the next few months, because we're going to come over on summer and then into the fall and everything, I guarantee you Teddy is going to be like, hey, man, Notre Dame's the place to be, brother. Notre Dame's the place to be. Like, he's going to be recruiting Christian for the next couple years, which I think will help, obviously, Notre Dame's case as well.
Yep. We're having some really good questions today. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Here's a question from John A1, Ryan. It's kind of a big picture question, it looks like, but let's address this to Notre Dame specifically. And his question is, can poor safety play undo excellent cornerback play? I'm reading these questions, Ryan, because I'm actually trying to fix something right now on the site. Gotcha. So I'm letting you
gotcha. No worries. Yeah, John, I mean, yeah, it can if it's to a certain level, right? I mean, you can have the best corners in the world, but every cornerback, whether you are Benjamin Morrison or Deion Sanders or anything in between, you're going to get beat at times, like you're going to. So having safeties that can erase mistakes on the back end is important. It is. Like, we talked about Benjamin Morrison's stats last year, right? As far as how many catches he gave up, receiving yards, it's low comparative to most players, but he's still going to give up some, right? Like, nobody's ever going to be perfect. So with that in mind, safeties and cornerbacks really play off of each other so well. I mean, but you could say also vice versa of like, can poor cornerback play affect safeties? Excellent safety play? Yes. The answer is yes. You need both of these positions to work well together. That's why in the back end, you'll see guys communicating at such a high level. What coverage is it? Who's passing off? Who's got what zone? All that type of stuff, right? What alignment means this? You're going to see a lot of communication because those play off of each other so well. So yes, if Notre Dame has tremendous cornerback play in 2023 with Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart and Jaden Mickey and Thomas Harper at nickel, and if they're great, that's fantastic. But if you're on the back end, if your safeties are bad, then you're still going to give up a lot of big plays because at the end of the day, cornerbacks can't cover all day and they're going to give up some things. And if you don't have safeties that can make up for some mistakes, yes, it can hurt your overall play. There's no doubt.
All right, Ryan, we've got a question down here about, we have a super chat here from Fighting Irish Raiders. This is a really good one.
And the question is, thank you so much for the super chat, by the way. What 4 Notre Dame teams would you put in the playoff game versus each other? I choose 1988, 1993, 2005, 2015, in which it would be 1988 versus 2015 and 1993 versus 2005 Notre Dame.
I loved that Notre Dame 2005 team. It was one of my favorite teams to watch because big Brady Quinn fan. You talked earlier about bowl games being a sort of a potential breaking out
Springboard
point. Samardzija against Oregon State, they lost that game, but Jeff Samardzija showed some skill in that game, if you remember. But I can't have the 15 or the 05 team in that. Well, to me, the 15 team was very talented, but that team had Brian Van Gorder defensive coordinator.
Sure.
So I'd still have to go with the 18 team over the 15 team, right? You can maybe put 05 in there, but man, that 1990 Notre Dame team to me was pretty darn good as well. The 1992 Notre Dame team that finished number 5, they lost to Stanford that year and then tied Michigan. They went on to beat number 4 Texas A&M 28-3 in a bowl game, beat number 22 Penn State, beat number 9 BC 54-7 with Jerome Bettis and Reggie Brooks and Rick Meyer. That team was Bryant Young. That team was loaded. So I'd have to put one of those two teams in there over the 05 team probably, and same with the 15 team. So, so I'd go 88, 89 would definitely be on my list, Ryan. I mean,
who's your national champion in the end?
Maybe I'm getting a bit nostalgic. The 90 team had 2 losses, so I have a hard. So that team was talented, but I can't put them in there because they did have 2 losses. Even though they were ranked very high at the end of the year, they were ranked number 7 they were actually ranked number 5 going into the bowl season. But I think that ranking of number 5 was a little bit. It was a little bit about reputation, but they did beat number 4 Michigan that year. They beat a ranked Michigan State team on the road. They beat number 2 Miami. They beat number 9 Tennessee. So they definitely played a much tougher schedule. So I'm gonna go 88, as the 1 seed. 89 is the 2 seed. I'm going to go 1992 as the 3 seed. And just to get somewhat of a modern team on there, let's go the 05 Notre Dame team as the 4 seed. How about that? How about that? Okay. You know who wins it all? Do you know who wins the whole thing of those 4 teams?
05.
89. 89 Notre Dame was the best team that I've ever seen from Notre Dame. Like that team was phenomenal. 88 team was great. But that 89 team was unreal good. I mean, that 89 team, this is who they beat that year, Ryan. They beat number 2 Michigan on the road, beat number 17 Air Force on the road, beat number 9 USC, beat number 7 Pitt 45-7, beat number 17 on the road, Penn State on the road 34-23, beat number 1 Colorado in a bowl game 21-6. That team also that year beat a Virginia team that finished the year ranked 18th in the AP, 15th in the coaches poll that had Sean Moore, Herman Moore, Terry Kirby. I believe Chris Slade was on that team. That was a really, really good team, and Notre Dame absolutely annihilated. It was not as close as the 36-13 score. I think at the end of the year, I think that team played 7 teams that finished the year ranked in the top 15, if I remember correctly, in one of the 2 polls. I'm going to pull it up here real quick, but Virginia finished the year 15th in the coaches poll. Michigan finished as high as 7 in the AP poll. Air Force, I don't believe, finished that year ranked. Yeah, they did not. They finished 8-4-1. Michigan State, who that 89 team beat 21-13, finished ranked 16th that year, Ryan. So that's another win over a high quality team. USC that year finished ranked 8th in the AP poll. So that's already 2 top 10 wins for Notre Dame. That Pitt team finished the year ranked 17th, so it would have been the top 17. Penn State team that they beat on the road finished 14th in the coaches poll. And then they lost to Miami, who was the eventual number 1 champions. And then they beat a Colorado team in a bowl game that finished ranked 4th. That's who they beat that year. That's unreal. To beat that many good teams in one season. That's the best team Notre Dame had. They just look, if you flipped it, Ryan, and if the 88 team would have had to play Miami at Miami and the 88-9 team would have played Miami at home, the results would have been different. The 89 team would have won the title, not the 88 team. I mean, that to me is how it would have gone, in my opinion. Yeah. Miami was the only team that could have beat Notre Dame that year. That's it. It's the only team that could have beat Notre Dame that year was Miami. I mean, because again, Colorado was undefeated and ranked number 1, and Notre Dame worked them. Do you remember, or have you ever looked back at that game or watched that game or anything like that, Ryan?
No.
Notre Dame beat them 21-6. Here's who they had on that defense. They had Canavas McGee, Alfred Williams, Chad Brown. You remember Chad Brown?
Chad Brown was a monster.
Yeah, he was on that team. They had 3 front 7 guys that were like first-round draft picks on that team, that Colorado team. They had Charles Johnson was their quarterback. Darian Hagan was actually their starting quarterback. Eric Bieniemy was their running back. They had Jay Liewenberg as their center. Remember him? He played in the NFL for a while. Mike Pritchard was a starting receiver on that team for them. Joel Steed. Remember Joel Steed? He played in the NFL for a while. Yep. He was on that team. So that Colorado team was loaded, and Notre Dame worked them in that game, especially the second half. I mean, they worked them in that game. Darian Hagan had like a long touchdown run. That was the only thing they could do all game. He had like an option run that went a long way because Colorado was trying to do what Notre Dame did. They just didn't have as good of players as what Notre Dame had. And so they were able to shut down that option. Man, that was a heck of a team. That was a really, really great team.
Well, and Brian, a little update. A couple of Ohio State people in the chat have said that they would think about that trade, but they would ultimately decline the trade on
because it's hard to walk away from your guy, right? That's the thing with that, Ryan. It is. It's hard to walk away from your guy. Yep. But I think the fact that some of the Buckeye fans that they at least think about it says like that's the value of left tackle and then the concern that they have right now at that position.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I would also think about Marvin Harrison for a minute, but then I would ultimately decline as well. I mean, sure.
Oh, it's not one I'm like, get away from me with that trade. You're out of your mind. No, I'm like, oh man, boy, best receiver.
That would be nice. Yeah, it would be nice. Yeah, sure.
But at the end of the day, I'm not giving up the best left tackle for the best receiver. At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to for me.
Yep.
So, but yeah, it'd be interesting. I'm glad that there aren't trades in college football. That'd be terrible.
Be mayhem, man. Absolutely
terrible. That'd be so bad.
Because then team would be like, it would be like player for player, but then also cash consideration on one side and stuff. It would just get so messy.
Yeah.
Like so messy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what should be, is if a guy is going to leave in the portal and not sit out, you have to pay that school $250,000, something like that. You know?
Oh, they would love that. Programs will love that.
Yeah, exactly. Start putting some financial teeth to some of these things, and guess what? They may actually stop doing it. But now, that was a really fun question there. Fighting Irish Raiders. I appreciate that one. I like those.
We had another super chat from Garth Cassidy. Garth, thank you so much. Said, Brian, is Keanu Kia coming back next season, and is he a Mike linebacker, or do you think they will use him like Junior Tuilamaka?
We'll have to look into that one. I'm not, the last we were told, this was, I don't know what, Ryan, about 3-4 months ago when you interviewed his brother, because Notre Dame did they offer him, or they're just looking at him?
They offered him.
Right?
They offered Josiah. Yeah.
They offered Josiah Kia a scholarship, who's Kahano's younger brother. And at the time he said he was still planning to come back.
Yep.
Obviously things could change as he gets closer to being done with his mission, which he's still in the middle of his mission. For those who don't know, he's on a Mormon mission right now. And so things could always change, Ryan. But as of right now, the plan is for him to come back. And I see him as a Mike is what part of it's going to depend on, where I think his mission was in the United States.
It was in like Virginia or North Carolina.
It's like a sort of a normal city, like Charlotte or something like that. So, he'll have access to like gyms and fields, and some of these kids go have to serve in like third world countries and things like that. And that's where it can get a little tough for the kid to stay in shape. But Kahano's he's in a big city, and and he'll be fine. As long as he's putting in the work, he'll be fine there. But based on what we know of him in high school and his freshman year at Notre Dame, Ryan, he's a Mike, in my opinion. Here's an interesting question from Katie Keevers, Ryan, that I find fascinating to consider, that I hadn't really thought about, because I still haven't really digested the rule change a lot yet. But this one got me thinking.
Katie's question is, do you think the new rule changes in college football will affect teams that rely on time of possession to win games?
Big time. I think it helps them. I think it helps them a ton. I mean, there's a lot more value now to milking the clock, because you can really,
baby.
I'm really curious to see how this is going to impact Army and Navy. And you could literally, the way the rule is now, Ryan, picking up first downs, you could literally almost run out an entire quarter on a drive.
Yeah.
The way that those triple option teams work, because the new rule obviously being clocks don't stop on first downs.
Yep. And
so, I mean, not an entire quarter, but like you get what I'm saying, where each team has one drive and the quarter's over. I mean, that's going to really reduce games, in my opinion.
Yep.
And it's going to make it so much more important for offenses to jump all over the triple option teams immediately and force them to try to throw the football.
Yep.
I mean, you got to get all over them early. But yes, those teams, it is going to allow some teams to shorten the games much more than they could have before. There's no doubt. Now, does that all of a sudden mean Bama loses to Kentucky because of it? No. And I'm not saying that.
But there's going to be some strategy involved.
But a 42-17 game becomes a 24-13 game now, just because of the lack of possessions that you're going to see if teams are good at that.
Yep.
So, yeah, well. But it also, I think what it also, here's the negative side of it. It's going to make it a little bit harder to come back, because you're going to have a little, maybe a less possession or two to have a big comeback. And that's going to be a factor in it as well.
Lack of ability to stop the clock and all that great stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might have to see teams starting to do the spike thing with, like, if they're down 2 possessions and they're driving 6 minutes left in the game, they may have to get a big play and spike the freaking ball, to stop the clock.
I don't envy offensive coaches right now, man. They got to think a lot right now.
Yeah, they do. They do. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Ugh. All right. I'm going to ask this one, Ryan, because this is for you, because it's a NFL question that I cannot address.
Sure.
Christopher Crosby says, Chase Young, this is the defensive end from Ohio State, who's now at the Washington Commanders. Chase Young had a great rookie season. Since then, he hasn't stayed healthy. Washington declined his 5th-year option. Is it too early to consider him a bust?
Yeah, it's too early, in my opinion, Christopher, because we're talking about a player that has played one healthy season and then had 2 injury-riddled ones back-to-back. So they declined it, obviously, before his 4th year of starting, right? But he was a young rookie. He was only 21, I believe. So, I mean, he's only 24 years old right now, right? And yes,
he just turned 24 in April.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's going to be 24 the entire season is the point.
So if I understand that you haven't seen his impact in 2 years, right? 2 healthy seasons or 2 injury riddled seasons in a row. But if he gets back and he has a really nice season in year 4, then I think that could really propel him to the type of career that we thought Chase Young was going to have, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot that depended on that. Like, are the injuries going to start to take a toll on his body? Is he going to be able to get back to full health? Like, there's a lot of conversation piece, but for me, it's way too early. I mean, this is a situation where he's had one really good year in 3 years, but 2 years were not necessarily his fault of an on-field product. It was just an injury conversation. So if he has another injury year going into his 5th year, then we can start getting closer to that bust label potentially, because then you're going to be closer to kind of that, that window of no return type of thing. But I think it's way too early at this point. Yes.
I want to say this too, Ryan. I have a really hard time considering guys bust when it's only about injuries. Like, it's not like you said, when he's been healthy, he's been pretty good, right? I mean, wasn't he the rookie of the year? Looking at it,
I think it was the defense rookie of the year, probably. Yeah.
So I just, in general, this isn't specifically about Chase because, again, I don't watch much NFL, but this isn't about Chase. But if he's only being considered a bust because he's been hurt, I don't consider that guy a bust. Jamarcus Russell was a bust because he sucked, right? Like that's a bust. A guy that showed promise and got hurt, to me, is not a bust, in my opinion. Just how I define that term. I have a hard time viewing it that way. If a guy showed promise and got hurt, that doesn't make him a bust. It just means he had an unfortunate injury. It's like Terrell Davis he wasted an opportunity to build. He was a great running back, got hurt, and he was never the same. It doesn't mean that my perception of him should change of how great he was or how great he would have been without the injuries. So that's just kind of a thing for me. Like, I think a guy that goes to a bad program that ruins him, that you can still, like, David Carr was a bust. I mean, he was. I would sit here and argue, however, that if David Carr would have gone somewhere other than the Texans or Browns, and I say Browns because if he doesn't go to the Texans, that would have been the other horrible option for him. I think his career turns out differently. I do. I could be wrong. I have no evidence of that, but I think it is. But he was a bust. He wasn't hurt. He just didn't play very well. That's a bust to me. But a guy that goes out there and gets hurt as a rookie, like if Cam Akers never pans out, I don't know if I'd consider that a bust as much as I had a bad Achilles injury and he was never the same. That is a little bit of a technicality to me, but that's something I've always kind of felt kind of strongly about. Is if a guy got hurt in year 3 and he didn't really pan out yet, but you thought he could, that's kind of a bust. Sure. But like with Chase Young, he was pretty good as a rookie, got hurt, and he's not been the same. That I don't count that as a bust as much for me.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right. That's a really good question. Here's that Penn State question I wanted to get to, Ryan, from John A1 that I thought was a really good one.
Said, if Penn State joined the Big East in 1994 instead of the Big Ten, would they have been better off? Is there still an ACC today if that happens?
Yeah, there'd still be an ACC today because I think the Big East was ultimately doomed, to be completely honest with you. My question would be where would Penn State have gone?
Right.
That's what I think the change would have been. And here's the other thing is, this is an interesting one. Would Penn State to the Big East have been enough to get Notre Dame under previous leadership to join the Big East? Now, I don't think Jack Swarbrick would have done it, but there were some pretty weak athletic directors before Jack Swarbrick that I could have seen cowering and joining the Big East because they had the great basketball relationship. It was a great basketball league back then. Penn State would have still been in there. Maybe Notre Dame would have been that prize for the Big East to say, hey, we can still do this thing. If you'd have been able to get that the Penn State fans in the market and the Notre Dame fans in the TV market, that might have been enough to save the Big East football. Maybe. Because you'd have had Miami, Penn State, Notre Dame in the Big East. That'd have been pretty good. But I think they ultimately would have ultimately likely ended up in the Big Ten anyway. I think they would have taken a different path, and I think they would have been a more successful team going into the Big Ten, meaning they would have, I think, built on because Coach Paterno was starting to kind of get them back on track when they went into the Big Ten. Because early on in the Big Ten, Penn State was pretty good. I just feel like they were always doomed to fade in the Big Ten. And even without the scandal that happened, because that's part of it too. But they were never going to be Ohio State, and they were never going to be Michigan in the Big Ten. Just never would, never will, just none of it. They're never going to be that. But I mean, but they started to fade and kind of bounce back a little bit even before the scandal stuff happened, because I mean, they joined the Big Ten in 1993. The whole stuff with Paterno, that happened in 2001. And 3 to 4 years before that, they were 8th and 12th in the AP, 8th, 9th, and 12th in the AP. 2005, they finished number 3.
The scandal happened in 2001? It was a long
2011.
Really?
Excuse me.
11. Okay.
2011.
I was like,
yeah.
oh, that's
which is just, I mean, it's just one of the many reasons I just despise Joe Paterno, just for so many, and I always have. I've never liked Joe Paterno. But but they had some years in the middle there from like 2000 to 2005. They went 5-7, 5-6, 9-4, 3-9, 4-7. They had a 5-year stretch where they finished unranked in 4 of those 5 years. They just were never, to me, the same program that they were in like the 70s and 80s. Like, so from 1968 to 1986, when they won 2 titles in that stretch in 82 and 86. They finished in the AP poll starting in 67, 10th, 2nd, 18th, 5th, 10th, 5th, 7th, 10th, unranked, 5, 4, 20, 8, 3, 1, unranked, 3, 1. So 2 national championships. They were a big-time program.
Yes, they were.
And they just went and chased the Big Ten money, in my opinion. And, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, though, as Notre Dame fans, we kind of have to own sort of our favorite program's role in that, because Notre Dame kind of got the TV revenue stuff started with their own deal. Now, it would have happened anyway, but Notre Dame kind of got it started a little bit. Notre Dame getting their big deal kind of began that process, which then led to the independent league dying, because Penn State was an independent until 1992. And and the independents were already kind of going down, because like Notre Dame and Penn State were the last 2. The rest of the independents in 92 were Southern Miss, Memphis, Army, East Carolina, Louisiana Tech, Louisville, Northern Illinois, Tulsa, Cincinnati, Arkansas State, Southwest Louisiana, Tulane, and Navy. That's it.
Southwest Louisiana, huh?
Yeah, I think that's now Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, I think is who that is.
Gotcha.
It's because it used to be Southeastern Louisiana, I believe, is now Louisiana Monroe, I believe. Southwest Louisiana is now, it's the Raging Cajuns. So it's now Louisiana Lafayette. So they went from directional to
city.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I always kind of thought, like, I think Waterboy was the final straw for that. They're like, no, because they had that.
Yes.
South Central Louisiana or something?
Was that what it was? It was something like that.
Something like that. So that was in 1992. But consider what it was just 4 years prior, Ryan, in 1988, or even in 1990. Let's see me here. Is it 1989? Yeah, 1990. Just 2 years prior. This was actually, you know what? No, I take that back. Notre Dame didn't play a role. It was Miami and Florida State. But in 1990, the independent league was Notre Dame, Penn State, Miami, Florida State, Louisville were still in it. You had Boston College, West Virginia, Pitt, Rutgers, a lot of those teams, Virginia Tech, South Carolina were still in it. Syracuse were still independents. And then in what year did it change? In 1991, Miami went to the Big East. Syracuse went to the Big East. Virginia Tech went to the Big East. Pitt, West Virginia went to the Big East. Rutgers went to the Big East. And so that's kind of when it started. The whole the conference realignment thing really started.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a Big East in football back then. In 1990, there was no Big East in football. It started in 1991. So you had the ACC, the Big 8, the Big 10, the Big West, the MAC, the Pac-10, the WAC, the Southwest Conference, the Southeastern Conference, and then you had the Independents, Western Athletic Conference.
I miss the WAC, man. I miss the
Yeah,
WAC.
me too. It's what? Now it's basically the Mountain West now. I mean, it's
Yes.
literally the
Yeah.
Mountain West team. It's BYU, Colorado State, San Diego State, Wyoming,
Yeah, it's
Hawaii,
like
Air
the same.
Force,
It's the
Utah,
same
New Mexico,
schools.
Utah.
The same schools.
Yeah.
It ain't
I
rocket
miss the
science.
Southwest
Also said
Conference.
it.
That's what I
It.
miss.
It ain't rocket science. Said it was SELSU, South Central Louisiana State
That's what I
University.
said,
Was
South
that?
Central.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, I
Okay.
said South Central. Yeah.
Muck dogs, baby. Muck
Yeah.
dogs. Muck
Yeah.
dogs.
Yep. Yep. Oh, it's good stuff, man. Good stuff. And that's all projection, but that's just kind of how I've always felt. It's always felt about that one. All right, here's one, Ryan, from D double ya 9.
D
My
double
best shot
ya
at getting that
9.
one right.
If Josh Downs was drafted last year to the Colts, do you think that would have been enough to bring Caleb up north to either Notre Dame or Ohio State?
No, I think that would have been I think at the end of the day, the Downs family would have done exactly what they did, which is,
Yes.
Caleb, you do what's best for you.
Yep.
They were very pro Notre Dame, even with
They were.
Josh at North Carolina. And if Caleb being in Indiana may have been a little feather in Notre Dame's caps, but they would have needed about 6 or 7 other feathers to make that one happen. Because at the end of the day, again, look at the number of defensive backs Alabama has put in the NFL in the last decade and compare that to the number. Now, Notre Dame's had a couple guys, Harrison Smith, Kyle Rudolph, but Bama's doing that almost annually.
Yes.
If we're being honest, we have to be honest about that.
They just had the first safety off the board this year in Brian
Right.
Branch in the second round.
Right.
So yeah.
But no, they would have needed some other feathers in their cap than that one. And I'll tell you what, man, I don't know the Downses personally. I only kind of followed what I'm told and different things that I hear and what you tell me and what other parents tell me. But their ability to guide Caleb into his decision is an example of what I know of how parents should be encouraging their children. And they say, here's all the things we want you to consider. We want to make sure we're challenging you to think about this and think about this. Don't get caught up with this. Don't get caught up with that. And at the end of the day, these are the factors as you're going into your decision. Now make the best decision for you.
Right.
And for Caleb, that led him to Alabama. And so again, don't know them personally, but I did gain a great deal of respect for that family as I learned more about how they guided him through his recruitment. In my opinion.
And it should be the least surprising thing of all time to hear that Caleb Downs is killing it in spring ball. Like, oh man,
Shocker.
Really?
Shocker.
Yeah. That kid's probably going to make a freshman All-American list this year. So
yeah, he's really good. He's really good.
Yeah.
This is one that's going to upset a lot of people, but it's from one of our OGs, so I'm going to pull it up and answer it anyway.
Siggy13 says, Brian Driscoll, what would it take, uniform, conditions, gear, deal, money, etc., for you to accept a Jumpman logo on the Notre Dame football jersey, or is it non-negotiable?
What it would take is for Nike, because Jumpman is part of Nike, to say we will no longer do business. We will no longer have factories in the nation of China. We will no longer have deals with a company or a nation that literally uses forced slave labor to make our gear that we pay pennies for, but then charge a crap load of freaking money for people to buy. It would take that. Like, look, I have no issue with Nike gear. Nike makes a great product. It's the way they do their business that I have a problem with. There are some other things that they do that I have a problem with that I don't care to get into in this show because it'll turn into a political conversation, but I have no problem saying publicly that, sorry, I don't want to do business with a company that knowingly uses forced slave labor to build their gear. And people say, well, what about this company? If I don't shop those companies either, but Notre Dame is not looking to get a contract with those companies. So there's a difference between cheap labor and forced slave labor.
Yes.
Right. And I've learned this with my wife. Like, my wife has people that she's hired to do tech work for her that she does not pay a lot of money for what we consider money. But for them, that's a big salary because of what the cost of living is where they live. So she may pay someone $1,000 a month. And that's like more for theirs, more than what you make, Ryan, as far as they do very well. There's a difference between that and forced slave labor. Huge difference. And so I have a problem with that. and I don't care how good the products is. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if all the kids think it's cool. Maybe we should then do a better job of freaking educating young people on why we don't use those products, right? And so every time an NBA player starts talking about social justice with a Nike shirt, Nike shorts, I'm like, shut up. Just shut up. Okay. I don't want to hear anything from you until you do a little bit of research on what you're representing. So shut up. You want to have a stance on this? I'm all about you using your platform to make a difference in the world, but shut up. Okay. Just shut up. I don't want to hear it. And so that's why, and I don't care what your opinion is of Under Armour. It's not about the quality of the Under Armour gear. I don't care if they leave Under Armour, whatever. I like Under Armour's gear for the stuff that we buy, but I mean, I don't care about that. I have no business with that, wanting to do that with Nike. So that's my stance. And so, yes, it's negotiable, but it's not something Nike's ever going to do. And so, and I fully anticipate Notre Dame going with Nike. That's just my own feeling. I feel like they're just going to take the biggest deal, and it's going to make me want to barf. But, it's all about the Benjamins, Ryan.
Yes,
there was another question along these lines that I thought was fascinating. I had not heard this, but I wanted to bring it up because it was really interesting, and it was along the lines of the merch gear or the merch deal. But let me find. Okay, it's from Joe Birchie. I hadn't heard this, but he said this was in The Athletic today, Ryan. So why don't you go and read this question? I'm gonna try to find it actually.
Yeah, Joe says, interesting article in The Athletic today saying Notre Dame could sign an apparel contract for the jerseys only and allow players to have their own shoe contracts. Would be a great NIL pitch. What say y'all?
So I'm reading this now, and it's from Andy Staples, is what it looks like. And that would be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating if they were to do something like that. If they were to sign an apparel deal, apparel being shirts, jerseys. So for uniforms, jerseys, gloves, pants, right? Or it was just jerseys and gloves. Because that's the NFL. That's in the NFL, you are mandated to wear the helmet, the jersey, the pant, and I believe the socks have to all be uniform, correct?
Yeah.
Gloves, face masks. I mean, not face masks, but like shields, wristbands, cleats, all of that can be whoever you want to wear. There's no
cleats can be too.
Yeah, I believe so. So. Yeah. They don't all wear the same brand of cleat. I don't believe. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's the case. NBA is definitely that way.
Does it just have to be a uniform?
It has to be a uniform color.
Okay.
But like they used to have to wear the same type of cleat, I believe. But no, gotcha. You do not. Here, I'm gonna look it up now.
You might be right.
So yeah, it has to be like a uniform color. Let's see here. Each week, all right, NFL. Let's see here. NFL cleat rules. Because I could be wrong on this, Ryan. So I'm gonna look it up right now.
You might be right.
So here's what it says here. The NFL modified its footwear policies in 2017, moving away from a rigid requirement that all club footwear adhere to specific color and design guidelines to one in which players are permitted to wear customized cleats during pregame warmups and throughout the game. The approval of such customized cleats is still pending, something like that. That looks like a little bit of an older article there. Gotcha. So let me find that. Let's see here. It's that same company. Like, is this the only article that talks about that? Good Lord. All right. Man, oh man.
It's not a huge deal if you can't find it.
Yeah, so Nike's the most popular cleat in the NFL.
Sure.
But no, they don't have to wear the same cleats. So I'm actually going to go here's I can find it this way. But anyway, Ryan, they don't. I'm pretty sure that they don't have to wear the same cleats in the NFL right now. There's certain things you can and can't do, right? Because you'll see them doing like these different these special cleats like for causes and stuff like that. They'll wear things like that, which I think stuff like that's really cool. Like if you're going to use your stuff to bring awareness to people, yeah, I'm all about that. Yeah, so I'm looking at I'm like watching the highlights of a game right now, and I'm seeing like different colors and different types of cleats and stuff like that. So I don't know if you can like wear different brands, like if whatever. But I mean, I know NBA's that way for sure. The NBA definitely does not require people to wear the same brand of cleat. I'm actually watching this highlight right now, and I'm watching the Titans and the Broncos highlights, and I'm pretty sure that not everyone on the Titans is wearing Nikes.
Okay.
So, and they're definitely not the same color. So, yeah, I'll have to do more research into that. But that would be fascinating. NBA does that. Obviously, some guys have Nike deals. Some guys have deals with different companies. I think that'd be wicked smart for Notre Dame to do. I mean, let's just say Notre Dame's is and somewhat you're betting on it a little bit yourself, Ryan. But like, let's say Notre Dame gets to be a championship caliber team again, and let's say CJ Carr is everything we think he's going to be. You're telling me there's not going to be a bidding war to sign CJ Carr to your shoe deal, if that's allowed?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, you're telling me that won't. Now the here's the danger. Here's the danger. Is they're going to have to come up with some sort of rule, because and there's a lot of NIL agents who are good. I like, but they're pissing me off with this whole stuff about, we don't need federal legislation. Yes, you do need federal legislation, because you can't have 50 different states creating 50 different NIL rules that their state schools are going to go by. That you can't. It's just not possible to live under that guideline. There needs to be federal regulations. And the reason there needs to be federal regulation is because of all the lawsuits that have happened from players and other people to basically completely make college football to where they can't make any uniform rules when it comes to things like that. So there needs to be some level of federal regulation that allows an NCAA to mandate certain rules. Now, what the NCAA needs to not do is be stupid and try to go back to where they were, where they're going to control the flow of money and try to get a bigger piece of their pie back. That's gone. So if you still want to be able to run this thing, don't be stupid and say, we're going to put in things that are going to give protections to certain players, right? So, for example, a shoe company can sign any player they want to any deal that they want. They cannot, however, in any way, shape, form, or fashion, try to coerce that player to go to a certain school where they have a brand with. So, for example, Nike can sign, if let's say Notre Dame goes back to champion with their gear, right? Or Adidas with their gear. But Nike in a couple years wants to sign CJ Carr, or I don't know, I mean, pick a Notre Dame
Jeremiah
player,
Love,
Jeremiah Love, something like that, to a deal, right? Coming out of high school, right? Or the next big time Bryce Underwood, something like that. They can't say, hey, Bryce, we want you to go to Michigan because Michigan is a Nike school. We will sign you if you go to Michigan. That should be illegal.
Yeah,
that should be. Now, Bryce, we want to sign you because you're going to wear Nike cleats no matter where you go. I don't care what your jersey says. That should be allowed, right? They just can't use it to coerce them to go to certain schools. That would be my thing, because that happens in basketball and has been for a long time, where these kids get money from these shooters. Hey, we'll promise you, when you come out, we'll sign you to this deal, but you got to go to. I mean, Jaylen Brown's never really hidden that fact that he went to Cal because they're a Nike school.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where I would say you need to make sure there's protections there. So that way you're signing these kids to deals. But absolutely, I'd be all about that. There'd be a lot you'd have to work out, Ryan. But the idea of it, that'd be great. And
I think so too.
I'd say the same thing for any of their apparel. The school has to approve that it's quality apparel.
Sure.
Can't just me and you are like in our basement, like stitching up gloves that we, with IB on it that we want these kids to wear, and we'll give them some money.
Ooh, that's a great idea, though.
They're like ripping in the second quarter, like Notre Dame loses the championship game because the gloves that we made for so-and-so receiver ripped apart when he was trying to catch a tough pass, and it drops the pass. Something ridiculous. I mean, it has to be approved for like quality approval to a degree.
I like the idea of some IB football gloves, though. I like that idea.
But the point is, like, stuff like that, like the non-helmet jersey pants should be things that, as long as there has to be some uniformity in color. You can't have one kid wearing green cleats and one kid wearing pink cleats and one kid wearing orange cleats and one kid wearing, teal cleats, and you're, at Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be something there. It's got to be a team color, or black or white, right? Or gray. It's got to be, black, white, gray, or your team colors.
Right.
Sure. Same thing with gloves. That'd be really cool. I'd love to see something like that. So that's just more ways for these kids to make money. I'd be all about that. That'd be phenomenal. And if and this is, Ryan, what have we said? Notre Dame with this NIL, they need to be trendsetters.
Yes.
Right? Be trendsetters. This would be a tremendous way to be trendsetters. Yep. And you could even still sign a smaller Notre Dame could sign with an apparel company and then sign a smaller deal with a shoe company. But the deal is, hey, listen, you're not going to pay as much as you normally do because you're going to provide all of our practice cleats, and you're going to provide cleats for our sports that aren't big revenue making sports. However, our players have a right to get deals that they want in other ways with different companies, right? And then so that means we're not getting as much, but it's going to be a great opportunity for our players, because the reality is a lot of players, Ryan, they're not going to get those deals. So they got to then do what? What are there's got to be some level of we're going to provide a basic level of product for you, but your players aren't contractually obligated to wear these if they sign another deal. There's got to be something like that too, right? Because all 85 of your kids on scholarship and 100 some of your kids that are on your team as walk-on, they're not all going to have shoe deals. There just needs to be something like that where we'll provide the basics, but if you can get a deal on your own, or you could even do a deal with that company, like, hey, it's in your best interest to make sure that you're the one signing our players to deals, right? As many of our players to deals. That would be great. I would love to see Notre Dame be trendsetters in that regard, Ryan. And you and I have talked a little bit in the past about it. I wonder if you could do a shoe deal company and then also do an apparel deal company and two different things. This would be somewhat along those lines, but very much more pro player than the current deal.
Which
you just
is
have to put some right. Well, I hope that they do it, but again, this is going to require some safeguards at the national level. Some safeguards to say you can't use these shoe deals to coerce a kid to go to a school that you are currently have a gear deal with, an apparel deal with. You can't do that.
Right. Yep.
You need to let these kids make the decision of what's best for them. And if you're smart and you're a smart company, hey, I know that this school that this kid's going to, hey, I know that we're not, we're Adidas and Nike, and USC's a Nike school, but we're going to sign this big time quarterback to a contract. It's still good for us if he goes to USC, because guess what? Every quarterback that Lincoln Riley's ever touched turns into number 1 overall draft pick, right? If we're smart, that's going to be better for us than having him go to some, company where we pay for all of their apparel, right? Now, I don't know how many smart business people are doing this anymore. I mean, who knows? But, it'd be smart to do that, right? I mean, it just would make a lot of sense that way, in my opinion. But whatever. We'll see if they do it. I would love for Notre Dame to do that, man. Oh, man, that would be so great.
I wonder how many teams would follow suit if they did do that. You have to think a few, right? I mean, I don't know.
I think they would wait and see
the results.
Yeah. I think so. Because a lot of these big, like these people, Nike's not going to want that. Nike's not going to want to. It's going to be hard to go. Like Notre Dame won't sign with Nike and do this.
Right.
I don't think Nike has too much bargaining power right now, in my opinion. But if some of these other schools are smart and actually care about the young people, they're going to look at Notre Dame's model and say, boy, look at the deals that this raked in for Notre Dame's players. Yeah. And we're losing recruits to Notre Dame because they're signing shoe deals and going to Notre Dame and signing shoe deals with so-and-so and so-and-so.
That's a little bit of an equalizer to the handouts, man. It's a little bit of an equalizer if they did that. That'd be interesting. That'd be really interesting. I wonder how realistic that is. It's curious.
It'd be very fascinating. Very fascinating. Boy, a lot of good questions in here today.
Yeah. It's like, we're not going to give you a payout, but like you're going to sign a shoe deal with Under Armour or whoever, you know what I mean? Like it's interesting.
Absolutely. Good one, John. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I was not aware of that. I don't really read The Athletic, so I didn't see that, but that's really fascinating. I'm going to try to read a little bit more of it here after the show. So keep in mind, I just quickly skimmed this article. So, we'll see how it goes. But that'd be fascinating, very fascinating.
Next question's from Conrad, who said, "How does Alexander Ahrensberger departing impact defensive line depth? I think this is a loss, as I thought he had a ton of upside given that frame and speed."
It's a loss anytime you lose a veteran player that has some tools. What I came to realize about Alexander for this spring, Ryan, is he's a big kid with some athleticism. I just don't think football was ever natural for him, is really what it comes down to. And I don't think that was going to change. I think I'm happy for the kid. We didn't talk about this in the show because it happened yesterday when we were off. But basically, Alexander is going to graduate from Notre Dame already. He was in a class of 2020 kid.
So it's insane, man.
Graduating 3 years. He'll graduate in May, because I did reach out about this because I wanted to find out, like, is this a deal where he's just not going to play in the fall, but he needs another semester to finish his. He's not going to play football because he's going to take a heavy course load in the fall to graduate in the winter, so he can, no, he's done. He's going to he's going to graduate this in May, I believe, and go to med school in his native Germany, because he's from Germany, and I think it's great for the kid because he's not going to be an NFL football player. And he was a third stringer for Notre Dame right now. So what this means is this is another opportunity for the Tyson Fords and the incoming freshmen and guys like that at the 3 technique and the big end position to go out there and get more reps. That's what it does. I mean, it gives them more opportunities to get more reps. And so, Ryan, I did publish that, by the way.
Okay, cool.
That note. So that is up, by the way. So if you want to Jason Robinson just dropped his top 10. Notre Dame is in it. But yeah, I was a little surprised he did a top 10. But anyway, that's my thoughts on this. Opens up just more reps for those other guys. I don't think Alexander Ahrensberger was going to play a ton for Notre Dame this year.
Yeah. I mean, great tools, to your point, Conrad. I mean, the kid is, what was he listed at, Brian? Was he like 6'6" and 7'8" or something like that? Yeah. Like right around 6'7", 265, I think he was up to. He's got some legit athleticism. But to your point, like this is that whole line between great athlete and great football player, right? Like there is that very fine line of betting on upside too much, because it may have just never been a natural thing for him. But give him all the credit in the world, because he utilized a athletic scholarship to go and graduate from the University of Notre Dame, and now he's going to go be a doctor and go to school. I mean, like that is an incredible journey that he's been on, being a native from Germany, being able to come over to University of Notre Dame, get that degree, and then go back home and be able to really sit back and just be like, man, look what I accomplished in those 3 years. Like, that's pretty absurd to think about. So congratulations to him, man. I mean, he's going to be obviously very successful in his next step of life. There's no doubt. So,
yep. Yeah. I'm very happy for the young man. Very happy for him. All right. Here's a good question. You guys do a great job of like asking thought-provoking and deep questions, not just the surface stuff. So this is another example. Really good one here from Tom Connor.
Tom says, B. Ryan, how much do coaches take into account a recruit's age? A junior could be 16 or 17, or possibly even a late birthday 15-year-old. That maturity can be big, in my opinion. I mean, it can be, and it is sometimes.
And not even just about mental maturity, but even more so physical maturity.
Yeah.
And sometimes, though, you got to look at it and say it's not just going to factor into who you recruit, but it also factors in who you play. I still say one of the biggest mistakes Notre Dame made in the Brian Kelly era was playing Romeo Okwara as a freshman on special teams. This is basically a 16-year-old, right? I mean, that to me was just a giant mistake, in my opinion. And when you look at Romeo, I mean, that guy, Ryan, he is going into what? So 16 was his first year.
Probably. Yeah.
Right. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. He's going to his 8th year in the NFL.
It's wild.
His rookie year was 2016. And he's 27 years old.
It's wild, man. Absolutely wild.
He was a teenager when his Notre Dame career ended. He could have really benefited from an extra year, in my opinion. So you got to look at some stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, if a guy, because it's also the opposite. If a guy's older, then you're like, hey, this guy, you got to be smart. This guy may have reached his peak.
Yes.
He may be closer to being maxed out now because he's a year, he had one of those birthdays, or maybe a kid was held back in like the 6th grade or whatever. I mean, you have parents do that if their kid shows some athletic prowess to hold them back so that they're even older, and you'll see some of that. But yeah, it's definitely something you look at. Ryan, you've talked about this in the NFL draft. You got to look at these things like, hey, this guy's 25,
he's a lot closer to his peak. Like Will Levis is a lot closer to his peak than what Anthony Richardson is, for instance, right? Like that could be a differentiator. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's why projections so. I mean, Brian, I always talk about like scouting in general, and we could, scouting from high school to college or college to the NFL. Scouting is an art. It's not a science. It really is, man, because everybody just develops at such different rates. And again, like you're talking about this, Tom, a kid in that same grade classification could be 3 different ages. Like, I think that's why background is such a big thing. And I know, Brian, we talked about it, but like, that's why that's why the staff liked Joe Otting a ton, right? Because Joe Otting was young for his grade as well. He was
Deion
very
Colsey's
young.
about a year younger than most kids in his grade, and that's something Notre Dame fans need to be keeping into consideration when they're talking about, Deion being he's a junior in college, but his body's still a year younger than most kids in his grade. Certainly something to consider when you're looking at those things. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, someone says that's embedded in the chat. So funny.
Did what now?
Someone said Stetson Bennett in the chat. I just love it when the random Stetson Bennett's get thrown in there.
Stetson Bennett's closer to 30 than he is being the same age as Anthony Richardson, and those other guys. It's ridiculous.
Hey man, fourth round pick Stetson Bennett. So there you go.
NFL draft question next, Ryan. So I'm gonna ask this one of you. This is from Golden Domer. It says, Ryan, is there any scenario where Jack Kaiser could be an NFL draft pick as a fellow graduate of Pioneer High School? Such a thing would be epic for Little Royal Center.
Is it possible? Sure. I mean, Golden Domer, I see every year I see guys drafted that I'm just like, I didn't have a draftable grade on that guy. So it could happen. I think that the thing that Jack is going to, but I think what's going to be largely dependent on this is Jack needs to have like a dynamite season, right? Like he needs to have a big jump in production to start off the conversation, because I am not a believer that Jack is going to go to the underwear Olympics, right? The combine or the pro day, wherever he ends up testing. And I don't think he's going to be one of those guys that just like blows it out of the water. It's like, wow, man, look how big and long and explosive and all those tests. Like it's just not going to be a conversation. So he needs to make up for that with big time production. And he's had some production of the last 2 years, but it needs to be like a massive jump. So if you're asking me today, I would say it'd be hard for him to get drafted, but I'm not going to say no, because anything is possible, man. I've seen some very questionable draft picks in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I have. So possible, sure. Likely at this point, no, I don't think so. Even if Walter Football tells you he's a first round pick.
Oh my God. And they're not alone. Here, I'm going to somewhat disagree with you. I think Jack Kaiser's a better football player than you do. I do. And I think that his special teams work will help him as well. I also will somewhat disagree that I think he's someone who could, based on some things I've been told, test very well in the agility and some of those explosive numbers. Where he's not going to be good is he's going to be short and not long. And that's going to be limiting. And he's not going to weigh a bunch. That's going to be limiting as a linebacker. But as I've always said, day 3, you see guys drafted for special teams all the time in the NFL on day 3. Yeah. But the one thing I definitely agree with you on, though, Ryan, is he's going to have a really good productive year. He's going to have to flash on film. You have to, because to your point, you either have to do one of two things, or sometimes with some players, a combination of two things. And when you're as small as Jack Kaiser, I think you need a combination of two things. Number one, you got to flash on film. You got to be productive and impactful on film. And you have to test well athletically to overcome the size and the length and the things like that. There's no doubt. Because the problem Jack is going to have is Jack could have a great fifth season, and you still look at him and say, but can he match up as a coverage player in a league that is predominantly a throwing league at his size? That's the problem. And that's always going to be something, because Jack's not going to grow 3 inches this offseason and add 4 or 5 inches to his length and all of that. And he could be a box player in college, but I don't see him being a box player in the NFL other than maybe third down. But then we get back to it again. Is he a guy that you're going to want covering tight ends all the time? No, he has some issues there. So it just depends on the team and what their coverage structure are. But I think that stuff's going to hurt him. I actually do think he'll be one of those guys that'll have a surprisingly good combine. But for him to blow it up, Ryan, he'd have to run like a 4.51, 4.48 at his size. He'd have to really go crazy. I think he's going to put up really good numbers. I just don't know if it'll be enough to overcome his lack of size. But I could certainly see him getting drafted. I just because, like you said, Ryan, every year there's a bunch of dudes you're like, what? How'd that guy get drafted? So it's certainly possible.
Yep.
All right. Here is one. This is an interesting one from our resident Ohio State fan, Ryan.
Archer says, who is your Notre Dame guy that currently isn't a nationally known name that you think will blow up this year? I've been asked something similar to this before.
Yeah.
I think Jordan Botelho is my guy as far as a not nationally known name. I don't think most national people talk about him at all, because he was just what did he play, 100-something snaps last year defensively? So, I mean, I think that he could
and he needed like
10 sacks
40 in the bowl game to get there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the other thing. He didn't play a lot on defense during the season. And that's a little bit of concern I have about projecting him to have this breakout year this year. It's like, I know he played great in the bowl game, but that was one game, and he didn't do a whole lot else the rest of the year, although he did have a couple nice performances in November. But
yeah,
that's one. I think pick a couple receivers. I mean, dude, the way that I'm looking at all these preseason lists, Audric Estime. Like,
sure.
you know what I mean? Like, I saw a list the other day, Ryan, that had the top 10 running backs coming back, and then they had an honorable mention list, and I still didn't see Audric Estime's name. So apparently nobody knows that Audric Estime is good. All right. And so he could be one. At least
Logan Diggs is the best portal running back ever or whatever.
Right,
yeah.
Right. He's going to be a great pickup for someone in the SEC, but he was not Notre Dame's top back last year. So whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way that it's going right now, would you consider Audric Estime a national name? No.
I wouldn't. No.
He could be one. And another guy, here's my sleeper pick for offense. Jaden Thomas. Like, Tobias to me is an easy pick. That's a very easy pick. But Jaden Thomas is a guy that I think is going to have. I'm curious to see what his production is going to be, Ryan, but I just have a feeling that even if he's not their go-to guy, Jaden Thomas is going to be that guy. He's going to be like the Notre Dame version of Hunter Renfrow, completely different style of play. But you look down and you're like, Tobias had 4 catches for 115 yards, this, that, and the other. But Jaden Thomas had 4 catches for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he had the game winner, right? Like, and then that's who we all talk about. Is Hunter Renfrow never had the numbers to compare to the guys. But you know what? I'll bet you $100 that most people in this chat could name Mike Williams and Hunter Renfrow and nobody else on that receiving corps for Clemson in 2016. And guess what? Hunter Renfrow was not their number 2 receiver on that team. But everybody knows who he is. Huh?
Was it Deion Kane? Deion Kane was that year?
Deion Kane was number 2 in yards. Number 2 in catches was Artavis Scott.
Oh, I remember Artavis Scott.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Hunter Renfrow, Ray McLeod had more catches that year than Hunter Renfrow did. And Hunter Renfrow ranked 5th. He ranked, was he 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th? He ranked 5th in catches, 5th in yards, but it was a different guy. He had more catches than Deion Kane, but Deion Kane had like 200 some more yards than he did. He had 5 fewer catches than Ray McLeod, but he had 23 more yards than Ray. And he was also 4th in touchdown grabs, right? So not many people, because you know who their number 2 pass catcher was in yards? It was Jordan Leggett.
Wow.
Yeah. And Jordan Leggett was 4th in total catches. So, but everybody knows who Hunter Renfrow is. Why? Because Hunter Renfrow made every catch that mattered for them that season, right? There's something to say about that, right?
He proceeded to have a 100-catch season in the NFL as
right.
well, Hunter
Renfrow. But there's something to say about that guy that maybe doesn't put up the numbers of a Mike Williams. And I said this to you last week, the guy that really broke that, the guy that got Clemson off the schneid offensively, because they're down 14-0, was Deion Kane. Made a big-time catch and run in that game. But the guy that made the money play at the end of the game was Hunter Renfrow. And I think Jaden Thomas is going to have – now, he could end up being their leading receiver, right? It's not out of the question that he – but Jaden just strikes me as the kind of guy that when a play needs to get made, that's the guy that Sam Hartman looks at.
Right.
He basically replaces Mike Mayer as that guy. Who's the replacement for Michael Mayer going to be? At tight end, it's a different conversation. But as far as the money guy, the guy you go to when I'm getting blitzed, the guy that I go to on 3rd and 5, I think I'm if I had to predict, Ryan, it's going to be Jaden Thomas, right? Which is going to make ESPN happy because then they can still pretend and tell themselves he's a tight end.
Well, I'm going to label him a tight end if that happens, if he's a Michael Mayer replacement. So.
No. In moments. Okay, that's the 3rd sarcastic comment today, Ryan. You've now used up your sarcastic comments for the day.
It's probably more than 3. It's probably more
I'm
than
being 3.
Nice.
I'm being nice. Trying to be nice to you right now. So, yes, I'm working on that. But here's an interesting rant. I don't know. You might have heard this, but I haven't heard anything about this. But we'll go ahead and bring it up anyway, and then I'll quickly do a search on it.
Tyler Smith said, Brian, wanted your input on this one. Living in Ohio, everyone here is talking about why is Ohio State going after TJ Finley? Wanted your input on this one, why they would be in B or he is worth it for them.
Yeah, so I'm reading some articles. There actually is some smoke out there that I guess Finley said something about Ohio State, I guess. I'm reading this article here from the Ohio State SI site, and I guess was on a visit in Columbus. I don't know. I mean, my question would be: is what was the injury to Devin Brown?
Did he have an injury? I didn't even know he was injured.
Yeah, because
So
he got hurt at the end of spring, right? So that's why he didn't play in the blue gold. He didn't play in the scarlet and gray game.
Gotcha.
And so I guess he hurt his finger. I mean, I didn't know that it was going to be a very big deal.
You're out for a while.
Yeah,
type of thing.
Yeah.
Wait, didn't they just get Chance Nolan? Didn't they just get Chance Nolan?
I mean, but come on.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying for depth purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like this is just a depth.
Other
piece.
than that, I have no clue. I don't think TJ Finley's. I think he's a pretty not very good quarterback. I think he's
not very good at all.
Pretty bad quarterback.
Could he play a different position? I mean, that's my question.
Tight end?
I don't. Maybe he's big. He's very big.
he's big and athletic. So maybe they are talking to him about playing another position. But man, that one would not make a lot of sense to me.
Someone said he committed to Texas State.
Did he? Texas State?
That's what it said. That's what someone in the chat just said, and somebody else verified it.
So, I guess this broke an hour ago. So during the show, okay. I'm seeing two different things. This is what I love about sports, right? There's one site saying it's Texas State, and then another one is saying that it's North Texas. It's not North Texas. It's Texas State.
They are different schools.
It's Texas State. But yeah, that's more of his level. To be honest with you, as a quarterback,
yes,
yeah.
Yes.
TJ Finley's problem is he has a very
strong arm.
misguided view of his ability as a quarterback. And if he was smart, he would say exactly what we were going to talk about. Look, I'm big and I'm athletic, but I can't hit the broadside of a barn as a thrower. So I'm going to move to tight end or something like that. That's what he needs to do. He needs to be. Who was the guy that? He had the drug problems. Oh man, but he was a college. No, he was a college quarterback at Arkansas.
Matt Jones.
Matt Jones. There you go. He was athletic, but he just wasn't a quarterback. Couldn't throw. I mean, he had a big arm, but he just couldn't. He just couldn't complete a pass. And he moved to receiver. Blake Bell from Oklahoma was another guy like that. Big armed quarterback, but he couldn't throw. He couldn't complete a pass. He wasn't a quarterback. So he's still in the NFL now. As a tight end, still in the NFL as a tight end.
Yes, he is. Yep.
So those are definitely more realistic options. So that's wild.
Can we predict this, Ryan? Can we predict the stat line for TJ Finley as the starting quarterback for Texas State next year?
Go for it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. That'd be funny.
I don't have any thoughts. I don't know what Texas State has coming back.
Their offense was not very good last year.
I know that.
So
and they've also
who their quarterback was
line.
last year? Do you know their quarterback? You know who their quarterback was last year?
Logan Bonner? Was it Logan Bonner?
It's Lane Hatcher. Remember the kid from Arkansas State?
They both went to Arkansas State, so I still win on that one. I still claim victory on that.
Yeah. So it was Lane Hatcher. Yeah, claim victory on, even though you said a completely different human being. But yes,
they both played at Arkansas State. They were rotating back and forth.
Yeah, their offense was not very good last year, Ryan. They averaged a whopping 21.1 points per game. So yeah, they scored in and that includes 41 points in a win over Florida International, 34 Houston Crit. They beat App State last year. That's weird. Yeah, they beat App State last year, 36-24.
You missed my joke while you were researching.
What'd you say?
I said it's almost good enough for Alabama.
Ooh,
you said 21 points a game. Obviously, joking.
Ouch. Yeah, and I always thought Texas State was the Armadillos. What the heck happened there? I don't understand what the Bobcats.
A little necessary roughness.
That's right, buddy. That is right.
But yeah, Paul Blake's the starting quarterback. I heard.
That's right. Might as well. I mean, TJ Finley's basically somewhat of a version of that. So is Lane Hatcher. He's been in college football for 12 years. All right, let's get here's one, Ryan. I'll ask this for you since it's because you do talk to Jaden and you're the one that had this. So Red Bearded Eagle says, what has led to the decision for Jalen McClain to take an official? Is it just because he can take unlimited visits now, in your opinion?
I mean, I get Redbeard. Honestly, I give the staff full credit on this one, man. Like, I just think they're being relentless on this. I mean, honestly,
they went out and visited him in school.
Last week.
Was it last week, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was last week. I mean, because this is one where me and Brian were texting about this when I got this little bit of tidbit. It was just like, I did not see that one coming. Like, I thought that one was dead in the water, even with limited official visits. I didn't think that one was going to happen because I just didn't think that there was a huge interest anymore in Notre Dame. So them getting the visit, I give that a testament to the Notre Dame coaching staff. That's all it comes down to. Chad Bowden, the recruiting staff, the Notre Dame coaching staff that's on Jalen McClain. Someone convinced that action to happen, right? And it's happening. And we'll talk about this obviously in the future, but will something happen of this? I don't know. But all I know is that Jalen McClain did have a proclivity for Notre Dame for a while there.
Yeah,
And he
early.
has never been on campus before, still. Has never been on campus. Yeah. So getting him on campus, I think, is a big-time opportunity for Notre Dame. Like, this could be a little bit of a needle mover potential for him. Will it? I don't know. We'll see. But until if you get him on campus, there's a chance there, right? There's some level of interest there. There's something.
I'll say this. I have 2 comments to this. Number one is I get concerned with some of the schools I see him looking at and some things we've heard that NIL might be a bigger factor than it needs to be if he's going to pick Notre Dame, right? Having said that, what you and I believe about Jalen McClain and what you just stated, Ryan, is exactly why we said Notre Dame needs to get Micah Gilbert on campus. Because he is a Notre Dame kid. He just doesn't know it yet.
Right.
And so to me, that's something that we heard from sources last year about Christian Gray when he was trending to LSU and then Ohio State and all that. Everybody's like, look, he's a Notre Dame kid. He just doesn't know it yet. And eventually Christian figured it out. Yep. That's why this is huge, Ryan. To your point and this is why we felt Notre Dame was in such a great place early, because he does care about academics. He does care about more than just football. He does. Those things early on were important to him until some of the NIL stuff started kind of floating in there, right? So getting him on campus is your shot to convince him of this is why you need to come here. Maybe it'll work,
him.
Maybe it won't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
But as we've always said, if you get a kid on campus, you got to punch your chance. And you said this in your update on the message board, Ryan, when you put this up a few hours ago. Look, it doesn't change our opinion that they're not going to get him. But if he actually makes this visit, I'm going to feel a lot different, because I feel like he's the kind of kid that comes here and he's like, whoa,
yeah,
this is home.
Yes.
And that's exactly Micah Gilbert was not a kid that when he dropped his top 7, Ryan, we thought he was in the bottom half. Notre Dame was in the bottom half of that top 7.
Agree.
But he had people said, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go. And then as soon as he got here, within the first day on campus, he'd already committed to Notre Dame.
Yeah. And obviously that's the extreme. But even, Brian, we've seen other examples like before Malachi Williams visited Notre Dame, I didn't think they had a chance at Malachi
His mom
Williams.
and coach had to convince him to even come. Right?
Yeah. And now I'm sitting here, I'm like, hey, man, like there might be some opportunity there to close on Malachi if Notre Dame chooses to. Like there might be a chance there. So, yeah, man, anytime you get a kid on campus, things can change very quickly. And Jalen McClain, to your point, is a Notre Dame fit all the way around. Excellent student, a position of need, a pathway to early playing time. And he's from New Jersey, where Notre Dame has had a lot of success in the past recruiting, right? And he knows Al Golden because Al Golden has roots in that territory. So, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I would say Jalen McClain makes a lot of sense to Notre Dame. But again, we have to see how that visit goes, because I think that could be a game changer potentially.
All right, let's get down to some more. That's going to be very interesting, Ryan. I still want to see him show up. That's going to be my thing. That's going to be my thing. All right. Here we go. Here's one from Monolur. This is an interesting one.
Question is, I've been thinking about how much physical traits matter in a quarterback. So which top 5 in their time NFL quarterbacks since 2000 would you say had the worst 1 arm strength, 2 arm strength, 2 separate quarterbacks? 2 separate
2 is
questions.
arm talent.
Oh, 2 is arm talent. Sorry.
The worst arm strength since 2000? So which top 5 quarterback in their time of NFL quarterback since 2000 would you say had the worst arm strength?
So a quarterback that was in the top 5 a given year that had the worst arm strength is how I'm reading that, correct?
Yeah. In their time, so of an era, not so much in a year, but in their era. I mean, well, Peyton Manning never had a very strong arm, especially with the Broncos.
Average. Yeah.
I mean, even the year he put up all those monster numbers for the Broncos in, what was it, 13? Right?
Yep.
When they lost, I mean, he had a very mediocre arm. He never had a very strong arm, and it was never strong after the neck surgery, because he just never had the same grip on the football after that. But
He's an easy one. Yeah,
yeah,
Peyton's a good one.
yeah.
Trying to think if there's anybody else that like pops.
That just didn't have just had a not a very strong arm at all. I
I
mean,
guess Drew Brees' was pretty average. Like it
yeah,
wasn't like a howitzer or anything. It was solid,
yeah.
solid arm
He had
strength.
good zip on things like short to intermediate stuff, but he wasn't
Yeah,
a guy that was going to throw a million like 25-yard in cuts that are just going to split 3 defenders while he's running to
yeah,
his left. You know what I mean? Like you didn't see that from him, right?
yeah,
A ton. Um, but you got to think too is the NFL for a long time, put a very heavy premium on arm strength,
yeah.
and so you just didn't see a lot of guys like that. Here's one I never felt Matt, and I guess I don't consider him a top 5 quarterback. I think we've kind of exhausted the list of top 5 quarterbacks that I can
Yeah.
think of with those two guys. But a couple guys that were like good players for a time that didn't have strong. Matt Hasselbeck I never felt had a real strong arm.
No.
But he was a good NFL quarterback. He played on some good teams. Yeah, I never thought Tony Romo had a bazooka either. But he had a good arm. He had a good arm. He just
had
didn't
good
have
arm
like
talent. Romo had good arm talents.
He had good arm talent. Yes. The second part of his question, to me, I don't know that I could point to a top 5 quarterback in their era who had bad arm talent.
Yeah.
Like Jay Cutler was a guy that had bad arm talent, but he never was a top 5. He had an incredibly strong arm, but he didn't know how to use it a lot of times. I won't say bad arm talent. The arm talent didn't match the arm strength. That was a very overstatement of Jay Cutler. Yeah. Not a good analysis on that. But his arm talent never matched his arm strength or anywhere close to it. Is where I'm trying to come from on it. Like Kyle Bowler, if we were talking about first round draft picks, that would be an easier one to do because. Ryan, you can't be a top 5 quarterback if you don't have great arm talent in the NFL. Sure. I don't think you can. I don't. You can be a first-round draft pick with bad arm talent, though.
You know who I think was good for a couple years and then faded really quickly that I would say didn't have the best arm talent was Colin Kaepernick. I didn't think he had great arm talent. He had a strong arm, but I didn't think he ever threw a touch or anything. Like no finesse to his game at all.
Very system-oriented.
Yeah.
Very system-oriented. Here's a guy that I didn't think that I'd be curious to hear your opinion on, Ryan, who statistically for a couple of years was a big-time producer, Matt Schaub.
Yeah, Matt Schaub had a below-average arm.
Yeah.
Mark Bolger also had a below-average arm for the Rams for a couple of years. Kurt Warner didn't really have a great arm either. Like it was a good arm. It was
But he had great arm talent.
Average. Yes.
That was the thing he had. Yeah.
Kurt Warner could put the ball wherever he felt like putting it. So yeah.
Yep. And his timing as a passer that's where something for him. I think that the playing in the Arena League was an incredible blessing for him.
Yeah.
Because think about it, Ryan, that you want to talk about if you can't process information, that is not the league for you. That stuff happens quick in the Arena League. And I just kind of feel like that's something that was a big benefit to him.
Yeah.
But like Aaron Rodgers has a strong arm.
And
Tom Brady doesn't have a bazooka, but he's got a stronger arm, I think, than a lot of people give him credit for.
It's gotten stronger as he's gotten older, too.
Yeah. Tom Brady's first 3 Super Bowl teams, he did not have a very strong arm.
The last 5 years of his career, though, man, he had a plus arm, man.
Yes.
Like he put some balls in spots. Like, ooh.
Yeah. Right. And he could throw the deep ball later in his career really well, also.
Yes.
But the list of quarterbacks in the NFL that had bad arm talent that were first-round draft picks and starters is long. Yeah, I could just never say that they were top 5. Yeah, being Blaine Gabbert.
Jake Locker.
That list is very long.
EJ Manuel.
Wasn't Josh Freeman a first-round pick?
I think he was a second rounder, but it's close enough. Okay. Yeah, close enough.
He was a guy that had a bazooka for an arm, but just not.
Oh, he had one of the strongest arms I've ever seen.
Yeah, Kyle Bowler is the epitome of the difference between a strong arm and arm talent. He had 0 arm, and this is true at Cal. I mean, like anyone that actually watched his film and evaluated it from an execution standpoint should have never come away with the thought that this guy's an NFL quarterback, like much less a first-round draft pick, Ryan. Yeah. If I remember correctly, Kyle Bowler was not even a 50% completion percentage guy in college.
I think he was 47% in college or something like that. 48.
College.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about back in the 60s where that was okay. Exactly. His best year in college, was 53.4.
Yep.
And that was his senior year. Before that, he was 49.3, 46.7, and 38.6. And he threw at least 10 interceptions in every single season he played. And his last year was 02. So again, we're not talking about a guy that played in an era where, you have Hall of Famers like Joe Namath and Terry Bradshaw, I believe, have more picks than touchdowns in their careers. Like John Elway was a 50% passer most of it. John Elway had a year in the I think the late 80s or early 90s, I believe, when he was still playing for Dan Reeves. I believe he had a year where he was a sub 50% completion percentage guy, if I remember correctly, for the Broncos. Different era. Completely different era. Yeah, it was rookie year. Rookie year, John Elway was 47.3. And had years at 54, 53.6, 53.7, and then in 91, right? Just different era, completely different era. In the 2000s, that's terrible.
Yes.
Like it was so obvious that he was going to be a bust. But this is why I've said for my entire life, Ryan, the NFL has never gotten better at evaluating quarterbacks. They are the same group of people now that they were 30 years ago. In that if you can throw the ball country mile, you will get overhyped by the NFL. You just will. Even if you're not good on film. Even if you're not good on film. And it's like Jamarcus Russell. Number one, forget the whole never worked hard. That guy had one of the longest releases I've ever seen in my life.
Yep. And
he wasn't a very accurate passer, but you know what he had? A phenomenal receiving core and a cannon for an arm in college.
Yep.
Do you remember the receiving core he had in 2006, Ryan?
Was that Dwayne Bowe and all those
guys? Oh,
guys?
yeah.
Buster Davis.
I think he had 3 guys that went on to be NFL players, I believe.
Buster
he had
Davis
Dwayne
Bowe,
right? Craig Davis, Early Doucette, and that was the 06 team. And I think they had another guy in 05. Let me go look at that. See here. No, was it? Oh, I'm trying to remember the year. They had another guy back then that was a really good player. He must have not played with him. But yeah, he had Early Doucette, Craig Davis, Dwayne Bowe were his guys. Skylar Green, Joseph Adai coming out of the backfield. That receiving core in 06 was really, really good for USC, for LSU. Really good. So, some of those have been obvious, and you're just like, what are you thinking? Like, what are you thinking? Like, come on, man. You're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. All right, let's get to some more here, Ryan. We got one from let's see here. Let's get down to Rob Thidoff.
Rob says, Mailbag, Brian and Ryan, let's say in an alternate universe, if you were prop 48 back in the day, you sat out your first year, but you still had 4 years of eligibility. If Tony Rice is back in 1990, do we win the national championship?
Yes, absolutely. It was one of those not great years, Ryan. We talk about them now. They're not new. They're not just like only have existed like recently. 1990 was not. Georgia. Think about it. Georgia Tech and Colorado were co-champs that year. Michigan had 3 losses that year. Ohio State didn't even finish the year ranked in the top 25. USC ranked 20th. Washington was really good that year. They ranked 5th. There was only one team from the SEC in the top 10. You still had the Southwest Conference back then, and the independents were still pretty good. Florida State was good, but that Florida State team that year lost a couple games in 1990. In the regular season, they lost back-to-back games to Miami and Auburn that season. And so it was just one of those weird years, Ryan, where there just was not a great team. There was just not a lot of great teams. Penn State was a 3-loss team that year. Notre Dame was a 3-loss team that year. Miami in 1990 was a 2-loss team that year. They lost to BYU. They were ranked number 1, lost to BYU at the beginning of the year, and then climbed back up to number 2. So they beat Cal the next week, beat Iowa the next week. Then they beat number 2 Florida State. They were 9th, beat number 2 Florida State 31-22, jumped up to 3rd, beat Kansas, and then jumped up to 2. Well, then they go to number 6 Notre Dame that year. Notre Dame was 6 because Notre Dame had lost to Stanford, got beat by Stanford at home 36-31. They had beat number 4 Michigan and beat number 24 Michigan State, and that was a bad Stanford team. That Stanford team, when they beat Notre Dame, Notre Dame was ranked number 1 when they played Stanford, Ryan. Stanford was 1-3 going into that game. They'd lost to Colorado, UCLA, and San Jose State coming into that Notre Dame game, and then beat number 1 Notre Dame that year. It was just one of those weird years. They do not lose to Stanford if Tony Rice is their quarterback. They do not lose by 3 points to Penn State if Tony Rice is their quarterback. in my opinion. So yes, Rob, that would have been a national championship team. And Tony Rice would have ended his career with 2 titles, in my opinion. There's no doubt. And honestly, the other thing too, Ryan, is I think he wins the Heisman Trophy that year, because that was the year, I believe that was the year that Ty Detmer won it, right?
Oh, Ty, yeah.
Yeah, I think you just seen Tony Rice win it that year, because that would have been a great Notre Dame team. I mean, oh my goodness gracious, that, because Rocket was a junior on that team.
Yeah,
like, man, that team, boy, Ryan, that 1990 Notre Dame team was loaded. They were loaded. That would have been, that'd have been fun to watch with him at quarterback. You had Rodney Culver, Ricky Waters, Tony Brooks at running back on that team. You had Rocket Ismail receiver, Tony Smith. Derek Brown was a junior on that team, so he was older. Lake Dawson, I think, was a freshman on that team. I mean, Dorsey, dude, Ryan, that was the year that they were so loaded at running back that Dorsey Levens couldn't get on the field
and transferred to Georgia Tech.
Seriously, Jerome Bettis only had 150 yards rushing 15 yards rushing that year, and Reggie Brooks moved to corner that year. That's how loaded Notre Dame was at running back that year. That was a nuts Notre Dame team, an absolutely nuts Notre Dame team. So yeah, that team would have been pretty good. Todd Light was still on that team. Reggie Brooks had a pick that year playing cornerback. Michael Stonebreaker was on that team. Yeah, that team would have been nasty. That team would have been really nasty.
Still the best linebacker name of all time, Michael Stonebreaker.
Yeah, so. No doubt. Jeff Burris was on that team. You remember Demetrius DeBose? Do you remember him? He was a good player on that team. Michael Stonebreaker. So Chris Zorich and Bryant Young were both on that team. Chris Zorich was a senior on that team. Do you know who else was on that team, Ryan?
Who's that?
Brian Radigan. Does that name sound familiar to you? That's the Notre Dame's team doctor. Yeah. So he was on that team as well. So, yep, that'd have been a really, really interesting team. Very interesting team. So, good question, Rob. Very good question. Those are fun to do. All right, Ryan, let's have a little fun with this one too.
Says from Irish Mills 540, says Brian and Ryan, what would be your dream class by each position? Notre Dame class version, meaning recruits who Notre Dame went after in the 2023 and 2024 class. For example, quarterback Dante Moore, wide receiver Carnell Tate, etc.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm good with Notre Dame's receiver class from last year.
Yeah,
Ryan. I'm good with the running back they got last year.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm talking about a dream class, my quarterback is going to be Dante Moore. Anybody else that you would go with on that one?
Nope, Dante would be the guy.
Monroe Freeling would have been in my class as offensive tackle.
Should have been in the class. Yep.
Keon Keeley and Jason Moore would have been in my class as defensive linemen.
Yes.
Completely fine with the I'm completely fine with the linebacker
corners.
class. Completely fine with the linebacker class. And I'm gonna be honest with you. You know who is not in my class, Ryan? I would not have Peyton Bowen in my class. After everything that went down, I'm like, you know what? Sometimes you're just better off.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know that's mean. It's not a nice thing to say, but I'm just better off. I still would have. And if I'm doing it, you know who I'd replace him with? That's a no-brainer. It's
Caleb Downs.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That's, easy one. And I'm honestly good with the cornerback class. I would have loved AJ Harris in the class. That's the only guy that I would have considered saying I would really like in that class.
I may have tried to add a second tight end with Deuce Robinson, but
there you go. Yeah,
sure.
That'd be good. But I'm also okay. Like, hey, they needed more of a blocker in that class. Team needs. So yeah, that's where I'm at. 24 class is more interesting, Ryan. They got their quarterback. If I could kind of do sort of the class I want them to have, Kedron Young's I love Kedron Young. I think that guy's a dude. I think he's one of the best running backs in the class. Yep. Give me Gearby Lambert at offensive line. Mm-hmm. Good there. Give me, if I can somehow make the numbers work, give me Carter Nelson at tight end. If I can make the numbers work.
Yes.
Give me Justin Scott, Logan Thomas, and either Elijah Rushing or Malachi Williams at defensive end. Good either way.
Malachi would be on my list. No
Yep.
doubt.
Give me Kingston Viliama Asa and Chris Cole at linebacker, and I'm calling it today.
I would have loved to have a shot at Cameron Pruitt, but obviously that never happens.
Yeah, but it's a dream class. But I'm trying to be
Singleton.
somewhat.
Say Tylen Singleton was a better.
That's a good one.
That's
a Rover.
Yes.
Yep. That's a good one.
Yeah.
At safety, honestly, one of the guys that I want at safety is a guy that Notre Dame is on, and that's Jalen McClain. I've said this for a long time. I don't think they're going to get him, but he's a guy that has been a boy, I'd love to have that kid in the class.
Yep.
Cornerback, that's one where Leonard Moore would be in sort of my dream class type of thing. Caleb, it would be, if I could have a 3-man class, it'd be Caleb Beasley, Aaron Scott, and Leonard Moore. And then I would still recruit Carson Hobbs as sort of a nickel safety. Yeah. Because, say what you want about a film. How do you not have a personality like that on your football team? Sure. Right, Ryan? I mean, just
I'm very interested to see what he does in his senior year too, Brian, because I mean he's running some pretty dang good track times this year, man. So maybe that
well, and that's exactly what people have said to me that my sources over there like, look, just this kid's got a lot of untapped potential in him from a speed standpoint. I'm like, okay, and that's why I've said before, you do not hear me saying, boy, you shouldn't have taken Carson Hobbs. You know why? Because someone who I trust in like more just as much as anybody in the country as a cornerback evaluator is Mike Mickens. And so if Mike Mickens thinks this kid can play, and Mike Mickens loves Carson Hobbs, then I'm like, okay, I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to give you a benefit of doubt because you know more about evaluating the position than I do. And I think you know more about evaluating the position than most people that coach your position in college football. Your track record at BG, Cincinnati, and now Notre Dame is pretty flipping good when it comes to that kind of department. So, that's I can dig that one for sure. I'm going to do a last couple here, Ryan, because then I know we have to get going here. But we're gonna do some. I'm going to do something tomorrow at the very least myself. I don't know if Ryan or anybody else will be with me. I'm definitely going to do a show tomorrow, so we'll definitely do a more extensive mailbag tomorrow. But we did have a super chat from Christopher Galloway. No question. Just thanking you guys for getting me through the workday. Keep up the great content. You are very, very welcome, Christopher. And then Nathan Milton, I am not bringing up your super chat. It was not big enough for me to bring up with your little sarcastic super chat, man. So it's not happening. It's not happening, buddy. Somebody said Sammy Brown. I'm actually okay with not getting Sammy Brown. I think he's incredibly talented, but I still don't know what kind of football player he is, to be completely honest with you, Ryan. He's more of an athlete right now, where Chris Cole is a football player to me. Like, yes, he's athletic, but he's a football player. Kingston's a football player. And so, if Notre Dame got Sammy Brown, would I be happy? Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. So it's not that. It's just, again, I don't think they were ever really a player for him, but it's also about at least give me the guys that I know can be real football players or where I'm at. But
it's fair.
Safety, Ryan, who would you want at safety beyond? We kind of skipped this one. Who would you want at safety beyond Jalen McClain?
Oh, I would want Dwan Lane. I would be cool with. But I mean, just guys that they were recruiting. I wanted DeMello Jones. DeMello Jones or Ricardo Jones too, who they were recruiting for a little bit. That kid is a freak, but
I like Davis Andrews a lot as well. The guys that they're on that they have a shot at right now. There was one more question, Ryan, I wanted to ask because I wanted to get your thought on this. It's a recruiting question. This is from Brandon Plensner. Mm-hmm. He said, how do you feel about DeJuan Lane's ability as a tackler? I've heard people knock his ability and willingness as a tackler.
It's interesting. I feel like I need to watch more of his game film, I guess, for him, Brandon. But like on the highlight tape, I see him come to balance and strike at a good rate. I mean, maybe tackling technique needs to improve a little bit.
That's an issue that I have on some of the game film. He's not a good tackler technique-wise. He tries to go for big hits a lot. I have never had a question in the film I've seen about willingness to tackle.
Right. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. I mean, you can, and that's a teachable thing, right? Like you could teach better tackling technique. Like that's not a big deal. So I don't really have any concerns in that department.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the size, the strength, I think the other thing too, you have to look at too, Ryan, is he is a guy that plays a lot of different things. And so his technique's not going to be good right now just because he does so much but like you said, that I don't care about because I can fix that. I can get into the film. I can get into the practice room. I can get into the technique. I can do all those things. I can improve the strength, all that stuff I can improve. The willingness is there. And here's the thing, if the willingness isn't there, that's hard to teach too.
Yep.
The guy doesn't like contact in football, but I've never seen anything from game film, practice film, or not, I haven't seen practice film, game film or highlights. I've not seen anything from DeJuan Lane that makes me think he's not a willing tackler.
And you can't teach him being 6'3", 195 pounds. You can't teach
with speed.
Yes.
With speed. Exactly.
All right, well, folks, we're going to head out of here. Thank you all so much for joining the Friday Free-for-All Mailbag. Before you go, if you could please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, 5-star reviews on any of your favorite podcast platform. Make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com because we're going to continue to have great intel there. You would have known about Jalen McClain visiting earlier this morning if you were on there, and being able to continue to stay up to date with the latest in recruiting and team at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can also find the free content at irishbreakdown.com. So we'll be back very soon. Again, notification bell to know when a show will be coming up. But this will do it and conclude today's Friday Free-for-All Mailbag. So from Brian, I am Ryan. We want to thank you, as always, for joining the Irish Breakdown Podcast.